Proceed.
And take off 5H.
H?
Yep.
Okay. All right, good. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, April 3rd, 2018 meeting of the Edina City Council. Roll call, please. Ms. Megan?
Thank you.
It's good if she has a microphone.
Member Brindle.
Here.
Member Fisher.
Here.
Member Staunton.
Here.
Member Stewart.
Here.
Mayor Hovland.
Here. We have a form of meeting agenda in front of us this evening. Director Teague has asked me to add, and I think it should be in front of all of you, to Section 5, which is the consent agenda, 5M, which is a second reading of the ordinance involving Edina Flats that we approved at our prior meeting, I believe. So I'm going to add that to the consent agenda first. Is there, well, I'll let somebody else make the motion to amend the agenda to add item 5M.
So moved. Second.
Is there a motion? We got a motion second to add 5M to the consent agenda. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And, all right, good. And then with that amendment having been made, is there a motion to approve the amended meeting agenda?
So moved.
Got a motion second on the amended meeting agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Community comment. First of all, I see we've got a group of students. Where are you all from? Which?
Edina High School.
Yeah, which year? Freshman. Well, you all getting along okay with the move up to the high school? Yeah, good. Who's government class? You have a teacher? You have the same teacher? All of you? Okay, good. Well, welcome. Thanks for coming tonight. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address council on a matter of concern to them? This is on the community comment portion of the agenda. Something that's not otherwise on the agenda this evening would be appropriate. All right. Seeing no one coming forward and hearing nothing, we'll move on to the next portion of the agenda, which is the consent agenda. Member Staunton and Member Brindle have asked me to remove items F and H. Is there any other council member that wishes to remove another item from the consent agenda? Okay, with the exception of items F and H on the consent agenda, is there a motion to adopt the balance of the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion second to adopt the consent agenda with the exclusion of items F and H. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And then, first of all, 5F, which is the request for purchase on what we call the Normandale Park D and Bredesen Park A neighborhood roadway reconstruction projects. Member Staunton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You may recall we removed this from the consent agenda at our last meeting and asked to delay the approval of the purchase to this meeting to give, I know I had expressed interest in talking further with engineering staff to understand the issue better. Just to be clear, there's been some folks who've raised some concerns, and I want to make sure that I'm being clear about the two different concerns here. One is a concern about when we do these projects, we have a portion of the project which is paid for by our utility funds, whether that be the water, sanitary sewer, stormwater. And then there's a portion of the project that is paid for through assessments to the benefited property owners. And one of the residents raised a concern about how we're allocating the costs among those when we do a project, because we bid the project for the whole project, not just the accessible part, not just the non-accessible part. And I know many of us may have gotten a chance in the last week or so to sit down with engineering staff. Carter's sat down with Mike Fisher and I, and others of you may have also had a chance to visit. and went through the process that the engineering staff uses in all of these projects. And it isn't just in this project, but in every project. There is a line item sheet, and I actually don't have it with me, but it's a long itemized sheet that is pretty close to the same in every situation. And they try to allocate among when they do the engineering estimate, they determine the costs that are likely to be in each of those categories, and then when they get the bids, they compare them. And I have to say, after going through that, I'm satisfied that we do that in an objective way. It is going to differ from case to case. Sometimes there will be, for instance, one of the issues that got raised was the cost of replacing curb in front of driveways, and then compared to the cost of the apron. Well, the apron is a larger area, so it's going to cost more than the curb in front of it. So this can vary from project to project, but I'm satisfied that we're addressing that in a fair and consistent way, and that there's a process that allocates those costs. The second issue, really, that's been raised by the folks in this neighborhood and some others is just the pure cost that's being assessed against their properties. And I don't think that's an issue that we need to take up at this point, but it is, Manager Neal, an issue that I would like us to look at. I understand maybe 6-7 years ago we took a look at that issue in a global sense, and I'd like the council to, and we don't have to talk about it tonight, but at some point talk about whether we want to revisit this issue of how large the assessments are getting on our street projects, just to make sure they're at a place where we're both being fair and we're not overburdening the residents that are adjacent to these projects. So I don't know if other members have comments, but I'm willing to move the matter with that caveat.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
And then Member Stewart, would you like to comment as well?
Yeah, Ms. Idesness was going to put up a chart that shows, Chad, if you want to help explain what this is, but this is a cross-section of a street that shows, you have to look carefully to see what's outlined in blue and what's outlined in red, but the items that are outlined in blue are the only items that are assessed, and everything else is covered by the city.
Yeah, Councilmember Stewart, this was just a general overview that Carter Shozy had drawn when he was meeting with council members earlier in the week, and it really just shows a cross-section of the street. So you can see here's the street with the curb and gutter going into the foreground with the bituminous layers, the aggregate base, and anything else that supports that street. Storm sewer pipes, sanitary pipes, water main pipe. So similar to Councilmember Stoughton's comments, anything utility related is paid out of the utility fund. So storm sewer, anything related to that, including the trenches around that pipe, is paid out of that utility. Same thing with the water or the sanitary, and anything in those blue boxes. You know, the street is accessible cost, the driveway pavements, and then the restoration associated with the project. So it's just kind of a way to visualize what the policy tells us.
I found it useful. Sorry, I found it useful, so I thought it'd be good to show everyone. So thank you.
Other
Nice
comments,
work.
Member Stewart?
No, I have. We have studied this, and I have a high level of confidence that the staff has done really an outstanding job of picking apart the costs and trying to assess only those items that are appropriate for assessment. But it's a challenge. I think all of us are sensitive to the fact of rising costs generally, and the idea that nobody likes it when it's their turn to be assessed. So if there are ways that we can gradually and modestly move away from that, I think there's a sense of openness. And Manager Neal, at some point, perhaps it makes sense for us to reevaluate and see if there are other things we could shift from one side of that ledger to the other.
Manager Neal?
Thank you, Your Honor. Members of council, yes, what Councilmember Staunton is referencing, I believe it was 2012, we did a project with Northland Securities to take a look at the different methods of assessing, looking at our method, comparing it to other cities. There are simpler ways to do this, that in the end don't end up as being as fair because they're not as sensitive to different projects and different project costs. We decided at that time to stay with the kind of the existing policy and tinker with it a little bit, because even though it's complex, it felt more fair from project to project in any particular year, and also on a temporal basis from previous years to future years. However, it has yielded kind of this increasing cost that is becoming a concern. So we can and we will take a look at that, and we'll probably use a kind of a similar sort of methodology that we did 6 years ago.
Great, thank you.
Before the meeting.
Member Fisher?
I would just concur really with Councilmember Staunton's comments. We sat in the same meeting, went through the same spreadsheets, and I really have a great deal of confidence that staff is applying. The question is, are they applying it, these things consistently from project to project? And I really believe they are. I think they're actually doing a really terrific job in a difficult situation, because nobody wants to spend this much money getting their street replaced. But it is expensive, and I think I also concur it might be time to just sort of look at the whole. It never hurts to assess every 6 to 10 years what you're doing and see if there is a better practice out there. So that's it.
Thank you. Member Brindle?
Thank you. I have no problem with taking a look at it every few years, just to, the council changes itself. And so while I went through it in 2012, and so did the mayor, Kevin, Bob, and Mike did not. So it's a great idea to do that and get a deep dive into that. Another thing I will say, I got some correspondence about the amount of communication that the engineering department sends out prior to a street reconstruction project. It begins like 3 years in advance, so that the meeting involving a particular neighborhood, residents in that neighborhood are told that a project is going to happen in their neighborhood at such and such a time, and the meetings about that project begin 3 years in advance. So, we've actually gotten some mail this week that acknowledged that, and I felt that was, I certainly appreciated getting that from a resident, and getting that affirmation of good communication.
Thank you. Just one comment for me as well, and I think that the folks in the Normandale neighborhood that I think many of us have met with individually, collectively in groups with staff, did take that advice that we got from that neighborhood, and everyone up here went and met with our staff to get an explanation of the special assessment process, kind of a re-education, I think, because we all felt like we understood it pretty well. You know, we talked about how we build out the cost estimates in our CIP, that Mary mentioned, starting to meet with residents 3 years in advance. 1 year out, the staff starts to build these spreadsheets for the costs of a project, and those are estimates, the best estimates we can make. The unit pricing that they use are based on 3 to 5 years of experience on other projects, and we follow MnDOT standard specs for reconstruction. Over time, and I've been on the council long enough where I've seen in days gone by, the neighborhood on special assessment used to pay for the curb and gutter as well. That's about 25% of the project. And when we looked at that several years ago now, maybe a decade ago, it was decided that that should be a cost absorbed by everybody in the community to make sure that the burden wasn't too heavy on the neighbors, and that there was a direct correlation between the cost of the project and the increase in the value to the property. So I think we're all pretty comfortable with where we are. We've got a motion and a second. Any further comment? Otherwise, we need a vote on item F, which is a request for purchase contract engineering 18-4 for Normandale Park D and Bredesen Park A neighborhood roadway reconstruction project. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Member Brindle, item H is the request for a special permit to use city property at 50th and France for the period June 1st through the 3rd, which is the Edina Art Fair.
The Edina Art Fair, and as they did last year, they will set aside some city-owned parking lot for use as a beer garden. And the document at the top identifies the Lunds Byerly's parking lot, but in the first paragraph, it identifies last year's location. So since we're approving this tonight, I just wanted to note that and I did speak with Rachel Thielemann, who is the executive director of the 50th and France Business Association, and so that first paragraph should reference the access point in the Lunds Byerly's surface lot during the beer garden hours. So just that's what we'll be approving.
Good. Would you move item 5H? I misspoke when I said F. That was Member Staunton's 5H. Would you
Sure,
move?
I will move 5H.
All right. Is there a second on that? Second. Got a motion and second to approve a special permit to use city property June 1st through the 3rd, 2018, which is the Edina Art Fair, in conjunction with the 50th and France Business Association promotion during that time period. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Good. All right. We've got in the next portion of the agenda, which is special recognitions and presentations, we have one proclamation, and then we also have a presentation by Kaylin Eidsness on bike sharing. But first, let me read the proclamation. And I appreciate so many of our public safety folks being here this evening. And I think Tony Martin is here to accept the proclamation. Have Tony come up to the podium. Tony, for those in the audience, Tony Martin is our lead dispatcher. So he's the guy that leads a team that helps respond to situations that are emergency in nature as fast as possible. And you know, we've got one of the fastest response times in the state, if not the fastest. So thank you for your good work. Here's the proclamation. National Telecommunications Week, Sunday, April 8th through Saturday, April 14th, 2018. Whereas emergencies can occur at any time that require police, fire, or emergency medical services. And whereas when an emergency occurs, the prompt response of police officers, firefighters, and paramedics is critical to the protection of life and preservation of property. And whereas the safety of our police officers and firefighters is dependent upon the quality and accuracy of information obtained from citizens who telephone the Edina Police and Fire Communications Center. And whereas public safety telecommunicators are the first and most critical contact our residents have with emergency services. And whereas public safety telecommunicators are the single vital link for our police officers and firefighters by monitoring their activities by radio, providing them information, and ensuring their safety. And whereas public safety telecommunicators of the Edina Police Department have contributed substantially to the apprehension of criminals, suppression of fires, and treatment of patients. And whereas each dispatcher has exhibited compassion, understanding, and professionalism during the performance of their job in the past year, now therefore the City Council of the City of Edina, Minnesota, hereby proclaims the week of April 8th through April 14th, 2018 as National Public Safety Telecommunications Week in the City of Edina in honor of the men and women whose diligence and professionalism keep our city and citizens safe. Is there a motion to adopt the proclamation?
So moved.
Second.
We got a motion and a second to adopt the proclamation. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
All right.
Martin, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Just have a little bit of words to say on appreciation for this week. So everyone's used to seeing the big red fire trucks, police cars and the ambulances driving down the road, coming to the scene. But there's one very important group that is always behind the scenes, and they're always there, and that is the dispatchers. They are truly the unsung heroes that are always there and to keep the city safe and 24 hours a day for you. The men and women of this profession are translators, not the language translators that one might think, but they're information translators. The average person calls 911 once in their lifetime, and when they do, they rely on the dispatcher to really lead them into getting the help that they need. So when they do talk to the callers on the phone, they're relaying information to the responders over the radio and also typing the information into the computer accurately to document the situation for the responders afterwards. On an average day, dispatchers will talk to callers simply for just some direction, information, reporting a crime. They're going to be providing pre-arrival medical instructions, including CPR instructions, also helping catching criminals. We're expected to and need to find callers that don't even know where they are. They rely on us to tell them because people in stressful situations kind of panic. And we're also there to reassure the callers that help is on the way. Behind the scenes, these dispatchers are also answering all non-emergency calls and also doing other data entry for missing persons, stolen vehicles, etc. And so they can ultimately assist in any way that they can. People also underestimate the amount of stress that dispatchers partake in, partially because the importance of getting ultimately help to the scene as possible, as quickly. But also the phone rings and the dispatchers have no idea what that call is going to be, whether it be police, fire, or medical related. And they're expected to make split-second decisions with no room for error. I'd like to say that I'm proud to work with 12 amazing and probably some of the best 911 dispatchers in this field, and they work here in Edina. So I want to thank you again. They love their jobs. They come to work ready to help and make a difference every day. So we thank you for this proclamation.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Any comments by council members or questions for Mr. Martin? Member Bendel?
Just a huge thank you. I mean, it's, we as a city have, I think more than once, affirmed that we want our own 911 dispatch. And there are cities who have given up their 911 dispatch locally, and the county handles their 911. And we just don't want to do that. We want it to be close. We want it to be local, and we want it to be fast and efficient. And that's what it is. But I have on occasion called. Sometimes I see something when I'm driving where someone's weaving, and I think, I don't want that person to go too much further before they're pulled over and get some help, frankly. Mm-hmm. And so, but I do thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think for all of you in the audience and at home as well, if you get a chance to come to City Hall and during a time when they're doing an open house and see the dispatch center and the folks that are working up there, it's an extraordinary place, and the people that work for us do just a tremendous job of managing crises situations, and with the cool and calm that is to be wonderfully admired. So we thank you for all of that, and I think you've got a good crew here. I'll come down with the proclamation. We'll have a photo.
They're planting back there.
The people we dispatch for.
We have 2 rows. Some of you guys can get in front. You got front. So you guys are gonna have to squeeze a little bit more. I don't have a wide angle one. It's not a wide. This looks very nice. Okay. So I'm just gonna have you move over just a tiny bit. Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, Kaylin, thanks for multitasking this evening here.
Yeah, no problem.
And we're going to have Kaylin Eidsness make a presentation to us on bike sharing. We run these monthly surveys through our communications department, and that is the topic for this evening for Speak Up Edina.
It is. Mayor, members of the City Council, thank you for having me here tonight to talk about Speak Up Edina and our March discussion, which focused on bike sharing. As the mayor said, each month we have a monthly topic. And in this discussion in March, we pose the following questions. Would you use this service? If so, how frequently? What areas of the city could this service provide a benefit? And what are your concerns about this potential transportation option? It was an active discussion. It was open from February 26th through March 23rd. 82 comments by 40 participants. 588 users visited the site, garnering roughly 2,600 page views. And 84% of the sessions were from new users. And then you can see on the map on the right that the users were from, we had some in Richfield and some users in Minneapolis too. And it's obvious by the discussion as well. So this was a very common theme, integrate with Minneapolis and other surrounding suburbs. So if we use a bike sharing program, make sure that it can be active in these other bordering cities so that the limitations aren't set by Edina's boundaries. There was a little bit of confusion about who's paying for the program. Some people who weren't quite sure didn't want it to be a taxpayer-funded program. Transportation planner Mark Nolan chimed into the conversation and shared that a lot of these programs are paid for by the bike providers, and then there's a fee to the riders. But I don't think everybody saw that comment. Some people were concerned that the bikes may get left all over if it's a dockless bike program. So there's the docked bike stations that have the racks that you return the bike to, and then there's dockless, which you use an app on your phone to find where the bikes are located. So some people were afraid that this would become an eyesore, they'd be left in inconvenient places. There's also been talk about them all ending up at one location. But there are incentives in some of these dockless programs to get users to share these bikes all over the city. So if they return them to a certain spot, they get maybe a free ride. Some people were concerned. They see people using these programs and they don't have helmets. So if we implement a program like this, how can we get users to wear helmets? There were some concerns about Edina overall not being dense enough to support this type of program. They compared it a lot to Minneapolis. But then some people, on the other hand, said that we do have higher density areas, 50th and France, Southdale, Grandview, some recreation areas that it'd be fun to have these bikes. And then some people mentioned that it'd be fun to have these in neighborhoods and around schools because that's where you bike also. So it was pretty split on that. And some people said they'd like the city to continue creating more and safer bike routes. They were very complimentary of the trail system and the effort that the city has put into making biking a feasible option in Edina. And so it was a good conversation. There were a lot of discussion points on both sides, but it was a good conversation with a lot of active discussion. And right now, our current discussion topic that we'll be launching this week for April will be about a possible annual tree sale, similar to what some other cities do, where they provide discounted trees to residents to help build the canopy of the city. So,
Good. Any of the council members
questions?
have any comments or questions for Ms. Eidesnes in this month's report? Okay, now I think you've been talking to Manager Neal.
I think I'll ask our engineer to chime in because we did have a meeting this afternoon with Line Bike, one of the dockless vendors, and Chad can tell you a little bit more about that.
So yeah, Mark Nolan's been having a lot of conversations with that particular vendor. That vendor's been around talking to a lot of the neighboring communities, similar to the comments we see here. So that Mark and that vendor will be here next council meeting to ask the council to consider us doing a pilot this summer of one of these facilities where we'd have a time frame where we test it, and if we don't like it, we have controls where we could get the system removed. So we tested some bikes and scooters today, and Maybe there's some photos of Manager Neal floating around of riding one of those, but we'll be bringing that back at the next council meeting for your consideration.
I know that when I was at the U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting recently, that Lime Bike was there with some of their products, and so you
Yep.
might talk a little bit about the company itself.
Yeah, it's. I think we'll just wait till next time, and Gabriel will be
All right.
here to explain. They're all over the country, and they've learned some things as they've implemented these in other communities that will take those lessons learned before we start to implement it within our own community, if the council so chooses.
Okay, good, thank you. Thank you, Manager Neal, as well, Director Milner. Ms. Isons, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to the public hearing portion of the agenda. We only have one public hearing matter in front of us this evening, but it's an important one, and that's the discussion about the good work that's been done on the what we call the 44th and France Small Area Plan, with a lot of input from residents over many, many months. Work from the Planning Commission members, the Small Area Plan study team, which I think had 8 members on it, 2 from the Planning Commission, and then folks from the neighborhood. And Director Teague is going to introduce the topic, and then we're going to move on to Michael Platter, who is a member of the working group. Also want to welcome Bill Smith from Beco Associates, who is our lead consultant on this matter. Thanks for being here this evening as well.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Just to add upon what the mayor has said, a lot of work and effort has gone into this, a real citizen-led process, including the 2 co-chairs from our Planning Commission, Sheila Berube and Jimmy Bennett. Michael Platter, who is on the working group, again, all residents of the city, is here this evening to present the details of the plan, and as mentioned, Bill Smith is here as well. So this item before you, this is the first piece of the 2018 Comprehensive Plan update. This would be a 4/5 item. I believe the agenda says 2/3, but this is a 4/5, yeah, it says majority.
Supermajority?
Yes,
Yeah.
yep, so we need a 4/5 vote. The intent here is because the Met Council has that June 30 deadline where we can't do any amendments to the comprehensive plan until we do the full update. The intent here is to submit this piece as an amendment to the 2008, so it would take effect. And again, it would also roll into the 2018 amendment. The Planning Commission recommended approval unanimously, subject to no substantive changes, just making some edits and typo revisions. So with that, I will introduce Michael Platter to present the plan.
All right, thank you, Director Teague. Mr. Platter, welcome.
Thank you. Is this on?
It is.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Thanks for having me. Haven't been here for a little while. It's been a long time, I think. Looks good. Keeping the place up nicely. So
Would
just
you
want to go.
give us your address too?
Oh, I'm sorry. 4304 Branson Street in the Morningside neighborhood. And before I go too far into it, I just want to point out there's at least 2 other members of the Small Area Planning Work Group here. Eric Olson and Lisa Fagan. I don't know if anyone else is here, but I just wanted to point out them. They're also here. Obviously, they did a lot of hard work. All of us did a lot of hard work, but just wanted to denote them here. So this is one thing with this presentation, for the most part, Lou Miranda did most of it, so he put a lot of this together, so I want to also give him credit for that also.
Right. So Ms. Fagan and Mr. Olson, thank you for your good work, and thanks for being here this evening.
So 2 parts, the process.
And Mr. Miranda is here as well. Thank you.
Lou's here? Okay.
Yep. All right.
Gotcha. So 44th and France Small Area Plan, go through the process here and then the plan. So the process first, this is, we had many groups or many meetings as mentioned before. This was fairly similar to some of the other small area plans that have gone through. We have kind of a city has I think a pretty decent template right now of how these go through with a lot of things, and this was a piece of that. So what is the plan? Small area plan. This is 44th and France. As you probably well aware, the city has multiple nodes such as this where small area plans have either been recently done or are in progress right now, and this would be the one for 44th and France. The small area plan is an iterative negotiated neighborhood consensus. As Carrie mentioned, will be incorporated into the city's comprehensive plan, which then that comp plan is approved by the Met Council. So this was coming here now, and then the intent is also to be in the overall 2018 plan as well. Here's the members of it. As mentioned, the small area plan work team group, the volunteers, all community members there, along with 2 planning commission members, the city staff on here, and then the consultant team members. Bill Smith is here tonight. Why are these done? Well, they're done because change is inevitable. Small area plan provides guidance to City Council and Planning Commission as neighborhoods evolve, what happens over time. Many of these areas have been developed many, many years ago, and development will come. So we want to try to get ahead of that in areas such as this as to what the community would like to see on these areas. As you can see here, I believe the picture here, I believe is of I think it's the Durr building now, right? Or that's what I call it, but many, many uses in that neighborhood. Here's the overall schedule, a lot of information here, but wanted to just point out it started almost a year ago, last May. There were, I believe, 8 small area plan working group meetings and then 3 community meetings along with that. So a lot of meetings, a lot of effort have gone into this over the past almost year. Most meetings were held in the community. The small area work group plans, the bulk of them were held at the Weber Park Fieldhouse. Those were public meetings. The community meetings were actually held. 1 was at the Public Works facility and 2 were at the Edina Morningside Church. They were gracious enough to allow us to meet actually there in the community. We did find out a couple things, in particular Morningside and the adjacent neighborhoods residents are certainly a dedicated bunch. There was a lot of people at these meetings, heard a lot of input, a lot of opinions, and good information. This is an iterative process. We had the work group meetings, we had the consultants working on things between the meetings, we had the community meetings all to come back and give us feedback and suggest certain things, and that all kind of an iterative process finally to get to the plan in front of you. It had been to Planning Commission, I believe, about 2.5, 3 weeks ago for them, and now to the City Council. As far as the overall plan, so there's a couple things. We came up with guiding principle. You're probably familiar with those. You've had those in some of the other small area plans, in particular Southdale and some other ones, and then also go through the goals and policies of what's within the plan. So the guiding principles. So these are items that we wanted anything that comes to this area to be able to look at these and go, does this meet this or not? And we went through these as a group. First of all, safe and inviting, wanted to be safe for all ages, backgrounds, whoever comes to the area. A community gathering place, places to gather and spend leisure time. You know, a lot of what community gathering now is actually done in a lot of commercial places or coffee shops or things like that. Or, you know, is there an area there that could be built up as part of this that would become a community area for items such as markets or things like this? Circulation and connections, wanted to make sure the area is convenient for walking, biking, and transit. There's a bus line goes through there now. You know, how do people get here? How do they want to have safe connections to the nearby districts and the neighborhood? And one of the things too is discouraging cut-through traffic in the neighborhoods. In particular around here, there's at least a couple streets that there's quite a bit of that on. Also want to have neighborhood-oriented business mix of goods and services, small offices, commercial space to the market. This area is more of a neighborhood, really a neighborhood node versus a regional thing, so it draws people to some sense from other areas, but the majority is definitely a neighborhood uses for this area. Housing, want to look at some different choices. One of the things is choices for existing and future residents. One thing we talked quite a bit on is the what could be housing here. It could be all different mixes. It could be apartments. It could be townhomes, other things. And part of that would be kind of is referred to as a missing middle. In other words, the town has a lot of apartment buildings and a lot of single family homes, but where are those other pieces at? Like, like I said, townhomes or not high density, but some other multifamily units that could front all these areas along this area, along Sunnyside and 44th and France, for example. Also, part of that was be able to support Edina's affordable housing policy with anything that would be built around there. Height and size of buildings. The heights are guided by zoning. What we had in there was up to 4 stories in discrete areas. And that would be mainly along France Avenue. Really, it wouldn't go in towards the neighborhood really at all. As long as the developer implements principles within these guiding plans, goals, and policies. So in other words, kind of the give to get things. What are they giving to get something back from the community? Or what are they giving the community to get some other items? Mentioned the graceful transition, maybe some 3-4 stories along France Avenue, and then as it works back into the neighborhood, have more 2-story maximum townhomes, items like that. Also wanted to look at appropriate massing and scale, minimize, also get a public realm, and then smooth transition back into the residential neighborhood behind the area. Parking, one of the things when we looked at the area, and you've probably been around there, but there was a lot of parking areas. So in other words, a lot of the buildings there have their own parking lot, and when you go there, sometimes, I know a lot of people do, and I do sometimes, is you park somewhere and you're really not supposed to park there if you're not at that place, so you drive another 2 blocks and park somewhere else. One of the things we were looking at here in the area behind that is there a way to have a common parking area? Similar to 50th in France, but not nearly as intensive. Would there be a common area you could park there and then walk to all the other places around there, including, of course, on the Minneapolis side, where it's kind of a mirror of this in a way of the neighborhood node there. Streets and sidewalks, a lot of it would want to be more pedestrian oriented, make sure gracious sidewalks, gracious widening them, not having places to sit, places to talk with your neighbors, and really maximize the safety for non-motorized users. And one of the things that when we came up with this was, it seems now, I don't know, when developments would come in here, but part of it was, can the city do certain things at this point earlier than that for pedestrian scale or traffic calming, right around that area? More crosswalks, no right turn red, things like that that would enhance the pedestrian around the neighborhood there right now before really anything else may have come up. Sustainability and resiliency, urban forest, there is a lot of asphalt there now. Also, as things came up, they would come up to managing stormwater. Right now, and actually I didn't know this until we had the small group, but there's, behind the whole parking area, there's actually a stormwater pond back there that's really hidden from view. And I don't know if there's any opportunities there or something else, but there is a whole stormwater pond back behind that area. Visual quality, enhanced sidewalks, planters, lighting. One of the thoughts was there's a lot of telephone poles and power lines through there now. Could some of that be moved underground, enhance the experience through there? And owners want to keep their property value viable and attractive. One of the things that's not there right now is a business association. So one of the things that we may have suggested or want to suggest is that there is a business association there for common area things. It does not exist today. Same thing, high quality design, high quality materials, high quality architecture, design, materials, energy efficiency, new and remodeled buildings to harmonize with what's there. There's a lot of existing structure that would probably stay there, but also how do new items come in and go with those that are already in place. The goals and policies, go through these as well. This is what was coming out of those guiding principles to be a part of that. So land use and urban design framework goals, want to maintain and strengthen the core of the area, ensure that buildings interact with the public realm, ensure that there are graceful transitions in building height and density from the France Avenue area where the businesses are, potentially new residential there, and to the adjacent neighborhoods, promote flexible evolution of land uses, and minimize the impact of automobiles. And again, part of that was, do we have a central parking place there that you could actually park and use the whole area versus potentially having to drive around just a few blocks to get to a lot of the different shops. Land use and community design principles, the designation of the neighborhood node to replace the neighborhood commercial. Any future projects here obviously would comply with the Edina City Code right now, land regulations, land use. New developments that change permitted land use, scale, and intensity will require the developer must invest in the public realm, both at the small area-wide scale and project-specific scale for this. Again, the kind of the give-to-get pieces for that. Land use and community design policies. The city would consider development proposals for approval where proposed heights are within the range of 3 to 4 along France and 2 to 3 stories along Sunnyside and back into the neighborhood with a 2-story maximum as you get there. Proposed densities we believe are appropriate based on building height and lot area. Developer would have to address and demonstrate, invest in the public realm within the small area, not only maybe around their building, that lot, but also in the adjoining pieces. Economic vitality goals, encourage property owners to explore shared interests. Part of that would be, is there, again, centralized parking? Is there a neighborhood or a business association with that? Explore the city's interest in property assembly. There's, as you can see on the map right here, there are a lot of different parcels and tracts throughout there. And then, as mentioned before, explore a business improvement district. Economic vitality policies, support redevelopment of obsolete properties, site assembly and revitalization consistent with the small area plan and other city goals and policies. Use the redevelopment tools to create public realm improvements, and the city having flexibility in deciding which development tools to be used by considering a variety of factors. Transportation goals want to ensure safe and convenient and efficient movement, not only getting to here, but also when you're within this area. Improve convenience and safety for local trips. Encourage through trips on France Avenue versus some of the cut streets that what's happening. One of the goals will be to minimize any impact of traffic on 44th and Sunnyside, and then also discourage traffic from traveling on the local connector streets. Ensure safe and secure places to park cars and bikes. There aren't a lot, I know this firsthand, there aren't a lot of bike parking areas there right now. There's some, but it seems pretty light compared to how many bikes you see around there. Trying to make that easier to wait for or use transit. Like I said, there's the 6 bus line stops right there that goes down France, so how do we make sure people are aware of that and use that? Ensure that cyclists are with any range of abilities and comfort levels are able to bike within the small area. Transportation policies, coordinating with the rest of the city. Obviously across the street is Minneapolis. Anything that the city has for their, now they have the, I believe, bike path build-out policies and other things like that. And then also be coordinating with any developer that comes in there to help address these issues and enhance the area. So just in conclusion, I think it's a great plan. There's a lot of hard work put into it, and hope you would see the same thing with that. I just want to introduce Bill for a second. He had a couple comments he wanted to bring up with the plan itself.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Mayor and council members, I wanted to bring to your attention that there are some typos in the plan that was approved by the Planning Commission. And so I just wanted to bring those to your attention up front so you're aware of them. We did have 9 members on the work group. We inadvertently left Lou Miranda's name out of the acknowledgments, and Lou Miranda did discover this and ask me, where am I?
Is that some kind of philosophical question? Or
it was a philosophical question. Well, you know Lou Miranda. The other that was brought to our attention was in the park section. Let me pronounce this park correctly. Cogetin Park, I believe it's.
Coteen.
Well, and that's, thank you. And so that is something that needs to be added. And then the mayor at a meeting identified a building in one of our sections for the intersection for France Avenue, where you said the building did not look as though it belonged at at 44th and France. Instead, it looked like it was from some other place. So that's something we want to correct as well. Finally, the one that I think is the most substantive is that there is a typo in a table that identifies 30 dwelling units per acre as the density. And that is not the density that was intended. The work group throughout the document, 2 or 3 places in the executive summary and as well in the body of the text of the document, talked about being more than 12 dwelling units per acre, and that would be governed by building height, by the size of the parcel, et cetera. So I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of those.
Okay, good. Questions for Mr. Smith? Yes, Member Staunton.
I don't know if this is for Mr. Smith or Mr. Platter, but I noticed in a couple of places in the document there's some reference to some of the structures in the area. I think one footnote talked about 3 different structures that would be eligible for heritage landmark designation. And the document talks in a lot of ways about incentives that we might, if a developer is willing to give the community something, there might be some bonuses in terms of height, et cetera. I'm wondering if it's fair to read the document to also permit some incentives for those property owners who might preserve those buildings as we move forward.
Mayor and Councilmember Staunton, that is certainly something that we can look into. Of course, as you know, there are some advantages, tax advantages that heritage properties that are on the historic preservation list are entitled to. We had not considered the kind of negotiation I think that you're suggesting, but that's certainly something that we could look into.
Well, and certainly as we think about this as a guiding document and we're going to implement it through zoning code, I know there's more detail that's been talked about in terms of what one might do to persuade us to permit a more height, but it makes me start thinking about, an existing structure that really contributes to the character of the neighborhood. What do we do for that property owner to make sure they have incentives to maintain that and keep that character anchor, if you will?
And we did find both as represented by members of the work group and members of the community at large that these 3 properties are very important and that uniformly people want to see them unchanged, untouched. And so their efforts to ensure that that happens is something that we ought to look at.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments for Mr. Smith or Mr. Platter at this point in time? All right. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much.
And good to see you on Sunday at the flower show at the Galleria, you and your family.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming over.
It smelled good.
All right, this is a public hearing matter, and I'm sure there are folks in the audience that want to visit with the council a bit. If you heard Ms. Eidsness at the beginning, you'll have 3 minutes. We use a lighting system, and when you've got 30 seconds left, you'll see a yellow cautionary light to direct you to think about wrapping up your comments within that 30-second period, and we like to maintain that 3-minute time limit so that everybody gets treated the same way. So if anyone wishes to come forward and comment with regard to this proposal that's in front of the council, feel free to come forward and give us your name and address. If you don't have an item that you want to use for visual display, it's best to use one of the side podiums. And come on, forward, please. Yes. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Good evening.
Here, we'll give you a handheld microphone if you want to use
I think I have to, right, for the...
Yeah, you'll need that handheld.
Thanks very much. Good evening. My name is Madeline Nasser. I'm a resident, but tonight I'm here on behalf of the steering committee for the Morningside Neighborhood Association.
Would you give us your address, please, Madeline?
My address is 3930 West 44th.
Thank you.
So kind of in the heart of the matter. During the small area plan process, we became aware from several residents that they were concerned about their ability to participate in the process. So as a result, the steering committee decided to conduct a survey to give our residents an additional opportunity to comment on the future of the 44th and France commercial node. The draft results of the survey were communicated to the working group fairly quickly. The final report was sent to, I believe, all of you and the Planning Commission in December. Knowing, however, though, how much you are expected to review and the volume of materials that come your way, we felt it was important tonight, as you consider the small area plan, to review a few of the high-level takeaways. The survey was conducted in the fall of 2017. We used various neighborhood groups as well as our Morningside neighborhood contact list. We had a response of from 274 people, 90% of whom identified as Morningside residents. So this first chart I put up there, I guess you can see it, when asked about their interest or ability to participate in the community forums for the small area plan, we had 175 respondents who were unable to attend because they did not know or were unable to attend either meeting. It's partially why we felt like it would be good tonight to come and share some of these comments. In terms of supported heights, this is the hot button issue, so we wanted to make sure we covered it tonight. When we asked them about their feelings on height limits and what are some of the maximum height limits they could see supporting in that area, 2/3 of the respondents supported a 2-story or less limit on 44th and Sunnyside, and roughly 80% support 3 stories or less on France. When asked about the possibility of the SAP relaxing land use restrictions and allowing flexibility in building use and scale, over 80% preferred conventional zoning and defined land use, building scale, and height limits. Obviously, we appreciate the hard work that the working group has put in, but also felt a responsibility to share the opinions of our residents who use this survey to communicate their opinions on the France 44th. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Ms. Eckner. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Sarah Lathrop. I live at 4008 Sunnyside Road, and I'm here to ask the council to adopt the 44th and France small area plan as presented by the Planning Commission. As you heard described by Mr. Platter, this was almost a year in process, and it was a deliberative process that really came to the community and let the community help influence the outcome. And as you've heard, I think before tonight and tonight, the building height was something that a lot of the people in the neighborhood cared about a lot. And the outcome in the small area plan that's been presented to you was a compromise that reflected the fact that many people in the community wanted there to be strict height limits, but that many people in the community also wanted there to be some development. And so even though the majority of the people that was reflected in the survey that was done by the Neighborhood Association, as well as the 329 people that signed a petition that was submitted to the city, were in favor of something more like 2 stories, many people were willing to accept a maximum of 4 stories on France if those height limits stayed in the small area plan as a compromise. And so I think that reflects a great deal of hard work and an honoring of the amount of engagement that was done by the community. And so I would urge you to accept it as proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lathrop. Good evening.
Mr. Mayor, members, thank you. I'm Cheryl Appledorn, 4611 Town Circle in White Oaks. I just have 3 comments regarding the small area plan, and 2 of them are really questions which I really hope you'll answer so that all the public can hear the answers in a public forum and we're all clear about what the impact of this plan will be. The plan recommends allowing development up to 4 stories on France, as you've heard, and 3 stories on Sunnyside and 44th, despite the fact that, as we've heard, there was really a strong majority of citizens at the meetings who listed height as their primary concern and supported a limit of 3 stories on France and 2 stories on the residential streets. But the plan, I think, is really important to note, and it hasn't been mentioned tonight, which is very surprising to me, also increases the height of a story from 12 to 15 feet. The explanation for this that was given at the Planning Commission was that for a 2-story building, a 12-foot story is only 24 feet, and that's less than a lot of modern houses, so that seemed a little bit too strict and unreasonable. But nobody has ever explained to me that I've heard, and I've participated in this process as much as possible, why that 15-foot limit is changed for the 4-story buildings on France. That would allow for a 4-story building of 60 feet. I've never heard an explanation of why that is. And the information I've been able to find for comparable buildings, 4525 France and 5000 France, are 48-foot built 4-story buildings. Don't know where the 60-foot thing came from. And my specific question is, what is the reasoning behind that change? And will, in the future, what is the impact? Will a developer be able to allow or to argue that he would prefer to do a 5-story building of 12-foot stories, because it's essentially the same thing? I think we really need to understand that. Everyone needs to understand that. Number 2, as Member Stoughton noted, I have some concerns about the historic buildings. The plan does note the historic buildings, but these don't have designation, and the give and get plan that's outlined in the plan doesn't say anything at all about this. It doesn't outline that as one of the things that could be part of a give and get deal. And it concerned me at the Planning Commission. There were citizens who stood up and said, one of the things I like about the plan is that we're protecting the historic buildings. And my second question is, do I understand the plan correctly as written right now? There really is nothing that would protect those historic buildings. And in fact, the way the plan stands, they could be torn down, redeveloped with a 60-foot building. That would include Brugger's, Caribou, and the Durr or Evereve building. So I think folks just need to understand that those historic buildings are not actually preserved, which was talked about at the Planning Commission meeting. And then the last thing is very specific to White Oaks. The plan notes that the traffic calming measures that were recently done on Sunnyside Road, which I totally support, have pushed some traffic onto 44th. So it recommends additional traffic calming at 44th in France and Sunnyside in France, but there is no consideration of whether any new development of 44th in France, especially combined with the new development of 50th in France, could increase cut-through traffic in White Oaks.
Ms. Appledorn, I need to have you stop. I've let you run over just a little bit. If you have your comments in written form, you can give them to the clerk.
So I just would...
Ms. Appledorn, please.
Okay.
I'll let you drift over. Thanks. Other folks have been right on the 3-minute mark, so thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. My name is Ted Carlson. I live at 5516 Knoll Drive in Edina. As you probably are well aware, we've got a project that may be coming through shortly through a sketch plan to talk about redeveloping one of the primary parcels contained within the small area plan. We've spent a lot of time paying attention to the small area plan process, been heavily engaged, and have had quite a few meetings with residents and businesses. Carrie or someone, can you by chance pull this up? Oh, okay, I can't see it. The sites that we're talking about acquiring are really 3 parcels. This parcel is owned by Lee Stotts, which is Edina Cleaners, and these are 2.
Now it's gone.
There you go.
Oh, okay, thank you. This parcel is owned by Lee Stotts, and these are the two adjacent homes. The original small area plan, I believe, or zoning called to include these two homes within the plan. As you may know, we own the site to the south. The uniqueness and topography of the site is laid out in these plans, and I've shared this plan with both the Morningside Morningside Neighborhood Association and members of the small area plan in preparation for my comments tonight. We would really like to expand the small area to include the second home on the western boundary, as that allows us to really do two things. Number one, maximize the use of our existing driveway for the property we currently own to create a private entrance. To create a private entrance for area residents and keep a separate public parking level for patrons of the proposed retail area. Secondly, it allows us really to provide a very significant buffer of green space, which is not reflected on this plan, between our proposed project and the adjacent neighborhood. Thirdly, as you'll see, that we've really have taken into consideration the heights concerns and density concerns of the neighborhood, and we'll be presenting that to you in a couple of weeks. So with that, I stand for questions, but it would really help us maximize the existing drive aisle if we could include the second home within the small area plan.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Anyone else? Good evening.
Evening, council members, mayor. My concern with the plan...
Your name and address, please.
Sorry. Matt Kramer, 4005 Sunnyside.
Thanks.
First, I wanted to thank all of my neighbors that participated on the plan. I know they spent countless hours to work out a compromise. One of the biggest things that they did have to compromise in order to add some height to the France Avenue area, which is not reflected in the current plan, is having the inclusion of 2 residential properties now into the plan. That is something that I do believe it is imperative as part of the neighborhood to leave commercial, commercial, and residential, residential. It helps allow for really what's an awkward area to allow more height because it's sandwiched by residential so closely, as well as it's single-family residential instead of the mid-market. Thank you very much.
All right.
Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Mr. Kramer. Anyone else?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Richard Cook, 4360 France Avenue South. First of all, compliments for the process of looking after a really special neighborhood and a special area. And I think the plan that has emerged has been rather protective of single-family homes through that area, and we all know the area well. Our situation is somewhat unique. We're in the 8-unit condo building that is just north of what's been referred to as the Dour building, Ever-Eve headquarters at 44th and France. We are at we're at Morningside in France, 8-unit condo building there. We are the only exclusively residential facility, I think, located within the small area plan. We're the line where the line comes up furthest north, extends behind our building and around it, excluding rental duplex properties behind us. So our situation is of some special concern to us. We had at least 3 and I think 4 residents within our building apply to be part of the working group. None were chosen. We understand that there was a lot of interest. So our residents did participate in the meetings. We still have a number of questions that we would like to ask, and I don't want to get into the detail tonight, tonight, but I would like to make you aware of this particular building and of our concerns. It's a well-maintained condominium building. Most people never notice it because it's rather small and right on faces on France at Morningside. Well-maintained, a building of origin 1983. We have had some trouble getting answers to questions. We understand that some of these are difficult to answer. Sometimes developers don't tip their hand, or buyers or whatever. We've watched surveying stakes around our property. We've attempted to get answers about what's going on. We've had difficulty understanding what's happening with the Doer building, its sale, future plans, and so forth. And so we have continuing specific questions. They may be more broadly applicable than our building sitting there on France. They are regarding height, of course, noise, parking, traffic. And we want to know more about the implications of being included inside that red line as a totally exclusive residential facility. Like I said, tonight is not the appropriate time, I suppose, to get into specific questions, just to say that we are continuing to be interested Morningside neighbors who have remaining questions. We've been somewhat frustrated at not getting answers about our future within the neighborhood.
Thank you, Mr. Cook.
Thank you.
Well, my name is Mark Schmidt. I live at 4011 Sunnyside Road. I'm here tonight just to recommend that the council approve this plan. As Mike referenced up there, it's on the presentation, and Lou did before the Planning Commission. It's a neighborhood iterative negotiated process. A lot of different interests come to the table, and not everybody comes out of it with exactly what they want, but they all get something with which they can work and be happy and know what they're dealing with. And I think this is a plan where residents, business owners, developers, Planning Commission, and the City Council will know what they're dealing with, and it will make it easier for us all to be excited about what's going to happen in the future in the 44th and France area. We hear the phrase, change is inevitable, change is coming, but that doesn't mean change is unbridled and that there are no parameters around it. And I think this plan sets forth what those parameters are in a way that we can understand it, in a way that we can work with it. And I think that that's something that's very important to do, particularly in what may be the oldest real neighborhood, in the sense that you have a mix of commercial and residential in the city. And the zoning code exists with the stated purpose of making sure that development in areas that have been established for a long time, the visual impacts are not overwhelming on those established neighborhoods. This plan takes that into account while also allowing for some change. And I think that that's a good thing. I think that we can all work with it, and I hope that the council sees it that way as well. And I really, feel that we can work with this plan. I hope that you do approve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt.
Yes, good evening. Hi, my name's Kip Myrie. I live at 4000 Sunnyside Road, pretty close to what's going on. Been there 48 years, and I've seen some dramatic changes, but everything just fit when the things were installed or put in that area, growth-wise. But when from my house or my driveway, I walk down to the street, and here I'm going to see maybe a 3 or 4 story huge building. I can't visualize it. I would like to see 2 floors, 2 stories on Sunnyside and 44th, maybe 3 or 4 on France, but it's just too much. I also want to bring up the fact that at this point, traffic has really picked up on Sunnyside, and it's been picking up and picking up. And I wish they would put some kind of way to measure the speed and how much traffic goes through there, because I haven't seen one in a long time on Sunnyside Road, nothing, to find out what kind of vehicles go through there. Not only the semis, but they drop off food right down at the corner, the Brugger's Bagel and the pizza place. And they just got a lot going on, too many semis. In fact, I've gone out and stopped them, and they swerve around me, and sometimes they stop, and sometimes they're pretty upset, but I'm going to keep doing that. I'd like to see a traffic study. The property value has never come up that I know of. I haven't heard of it. What's the value of our property is going to do, we'll say in 5-block area, 6-block area. Some of these visuals that I saw up here, they're outlandish. I can't believe that you're going to have all these bike lanes and fancy wall here and a fancy wall here and a business here and something here. I just don't see it. Also, I see that there's brown and tan. It looks like a cookie cutter. When you put up a new building, an apartment building or something, it's the same color, it's the same texture, it's the same theatrical. Can't they come up with a little bit something different? I mean, we've got a lot of those around now. Yeah, the semis are the biggest ones. They don't seem to want to stop. And also, I want to thank the committees for doing all the hard work. And it's been a long year and a half. And not only do they work hard, but we worked hard too as a community. We had 300 people sometimes gather and talk and at different socials, and over at Weber, we had a great turnout over there too. But there's just too much going on. I don't understand the whole thing. Some of these graphics are way out of bounds. I don't see the color variations coming in like they were showing on these streets. Looks like maybe somewhere in New Orleans or LA or something. Well, thank you. Excuse me. Good night.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Larry, thank you. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Anyone else wish to come forward? Address the council with respect to this proposed plan? Don't see anybody coming forward. Is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
We got a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. I think the comments from our fellow residents caused some of us to want to ask some questions. And Mr. Myrie actually touched on one thing at the end there that came up early on, and I think it was Ms. Eckner's testimony that I wrote down. Did you keep track of how many people actually attended all the community meetings? And she listed 2, but I thought I saw in the presentation there were actually 3 public input meetings. And so does somebody have total participation? I think Mr. Myrie indicated that he thought at least one of them had 300 people in attendance.
We had 3 meetings.
Do you want to come forward, or?
Yeah, it's actually, it wasn't a presentation. So there was 3 community meetings we had listed. The first one that was at the Public Works facility was 60 people, approximate number. And these were people that, had signed in, so there's probably more there actually that hadn't. The second one, 85, and the last one, 140 people that came to those.
Okay.
And we also had numerous people at the last 2 were at the Morningside Church, and we also had numerous people come to our working group meetings as well.
Yeah, when I was at Morningside Church, it seemed like you had the whole basement full.
Yeah, I think
people that were interested in different things.
You came there a little late, I think, on one of those nights, right?
Yeah, I did. Everybody was.
Yeah, not late, but
right.
Breaking up a little bit.
Okay, and I was just thinking about Ms. Fagan's comment. How about at your small area plan group member meetings? Were there residents there as well that were watching you work? Mr. Platter?
Yeah, it kind of varied. I would say between 5 and 10, maybe 15 or more, a lot of the meetings.
Okay.
We typically had a small, at the end for some public comments, depending on how late we were and out of time, but typically we had something for the public to also make some comments there, or we encourage, to give notes if we couldn't get to that also.
All right. We had several folks that testified that they wanted to see the plan supported as is. Some other folks had some questions about how you got to where you were. Ms. Appledorn, who lives over on Town Circle, was wondering where the 60-foot height recommendation came from. The 15 feet per floor is 4 stories, total of 60 feet.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe Bill, maybe you could speak to that one a little bit better.
Mr. Mayor and council members, I'll take a stab at it, but I think I'm going to need some help from Director Teague. As you know, the current language is for the overlay district. that overlies the 44th and France study area. It's 2 stories is the limit, 24 feet. And what has become clear, I think I'm going to say this correctly, is that 24 feet is actually lower in height than the rooftops of many single-family homes that are being constructed now. And in fact, in the neighborhood, the rooftops of residential homes are higher than 24 feet. So it began to make, the whole rationale of 24 feet really sort of came into question. One of the things that is clear is that because of some topography in the area, particularly at the intersection as you move back to the west along 44th, there's a slope. The first residential property is up pretty high. And so that sort of brought this whole question of the height to the fore then, because we were saying, well, my goodness, when we do we could do 3 stories or 2 stories as we approach the residential, and the residential, because it's on a hill, is going to be way higher than any new development that would be constructed. So we just, I think that's how the 15 feet began to creep in, and I think it's suggested that that would be something that would be changed later.
Yep. So to add on that, so as was mentioned, the zoning is 2 stories, 24 feet for the district. And the plan allows up to 4 stories. So that would take a variance or rezoning to PUD. So we would take a look at those specific heights at that time, anything over the 24 feet. The 30 foot and 2 stories we took from the Valley View and Wooddale small area plan. You recall the Edina Flats project, where the 2-story element that abuts the single-family homes was 2 stories and 30 feet. So again, consistent with the height of a single-family home. In regard to the 60 feet, we took that from recent developments. One example I would use is the Hawthorne. It's the project that was just approved behind the sound wall, behind Holiday. That's a 4-story building, but that one's 56 feet tall. Also, we're wanting to see commercial on the lower level. We're seeing taller ceilings on those first levels. So with thinking that we could see 4-story buildings up to 60 feet. But again, that would be negotiated as part of an individual project that's brought before the Planning Commission and City Council. But those were some of the guidelines that we used to set those parameters.
Okay, good. Thank you for that explanation. Then Ms. Appledorn raised the same issue that Member Staunton raised, and that was historic buildings, no comment on give to get relative to historic buildings. And I'm using that word historic. I think none of those buildings, I don't believe, have been designated as historically significant and are not on the historic registry. They've just been around a long time and seem historic in that sense.
That is correct.
All right. But nonetheless, something we could think about in terms of give to get if somebody wanted to leave a building as is. I think it was Member Staunton's point.
Certainly.
Member Staunton.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that there was not, if we tried to do something in our zoning code or in some follow-up, I wanted to make sure it was not contrary to what the small area plan was trying to accomplish. And I got the sense from Mr. Smith that it didn't, it wasn't prohibited by the small area plan. I think Ms. Appledorn is right that there's really not much other than a couple of passing mentions to that. And there is a underlying recognition that those buildings really help contribute to the character, and that's what I'm driving at, is how do we not create a reverse incentive for those property owners? If other property owners get to perhaps go higher, how do we give them an incentive to stay where they are, is what I'd be looking at.
Okay.
Can I just piggyback on
Sure,
one
you
other
can.
notion? Ms. Appledorn also raised the question of this 60 foot, but if you divide 60 by 12, now you get 5 stories. Are we clear that 4 stories would be the maximum under the plan? Or could it be 5 stories?
Yeah, there's no mention of 5 stories. It does say 4 stories.
Okay, so the intent is that it be 4 stories or 60 feet, whichever is less.
Correct.
Yeah, thanks for that. The other thing that Ms. Appledorn mentioned that she didn't get quite to finish, didn't get a chance to finish her thought was traffic calming, and I think what she was getting at was that she was wondering whether any consideration had been given to volumes of traffic with new businesses potentially coming in, and I think Mr. Myrie raised that same issue, and I'm guessing that what you're going to say is that if a project comes forward, we're going to require them to do a traffic study. We're going to hire the traffic engineer. The developer will pay for it, and then that'll be the linchpin for the traffic study in terms of whether what they're proposing makes any sense.
That's correct. That's
traffic volume
precisely what would
standpoint.
happen.
May I add to that?
Sure. Mr. Smith.
Yes, Mr. Mayor and Council. One of the things that the plan does include is language that makes very clear to that the extent, the geographic scope of the traffic study can be influenced by the city. Typically, when you do these traffic studies, you really do look at the critical signalized intersections. Those are kind of pinch points, and you figure they're kind of worst case conditions. So if something is bad, it's going to happen at one of those intersections where you have a signal or that's a major intersection. But we wanted to make it clear, and the residents were clear about this, as were the members of the work group, that they wanted traffic studies to do more, rather than look at just right there at France and Sunnyside, right there at France and 44th. They wanted to make sure that the traffic studies begin to look to the west, to the residential neighborhoods, to see how any trips that are generated by new development would impact those residential streets as well. So we do include that language in the plan.
Okay, thank you. I thought Mr. Carlson raised an interesting point, and I've got the small area plan study area in front of me here, and it goes up north around the building Mr. Cook lives in, and then as we go down Sunnyside, it only encompasses that first lot. I remember from the time before when we started the small area plan study, and Mr. Carlson, Mr. Stotts came forward with some ideas. The first notion was that those 2 lots to the west of the Stotts property, the Edina Cleaners property, would be used as a buffer. But then that second lot apparently isn't included in the study area, and I'm wondering why, and should it be included? There may have been a technical reason why it wasn't, but it seemed like it made some sense. And I think one of the neighbors noted as much, Mr. Kramer, I believe, thought it was appropriate that we include that second lot into the plan to create a better buffer or transition into the single-family neighborhood. So, Director Teague, what do you think about that? Or if we didn't do that now, when would we do it?
Yes, so if it weren't done now, it would be done as part of Mr. Carlson's development proposal request. He would need to amend this document, so it would be a comprehensive plan amendment if that lot were not included.
And why wasn't it included? When it was initially conceived to be part of the potential project he was advancing with Mr. Stotts. Yeah, Mr. Olson?
Yeah, thanks. Sometime between meeting 3 and 4, and this is not a commentary on my part about the merits or not of including these properties. I don't really have any comment on that. But our original sketch that I have in my hand from meeting 3 didn't include either of them. And then sometime between that meeting, July 18th, I want to say, to July 24th, where we had another meeting right away, both of them were included. And nobody really told us why that changed or who directed that change, but it did change sometime mid-July as far as I can tell in my little file here. Again, this isn't me saying one way is better or not, I'm not sure it's even an appropriate discussion right now, but it changed mid-process. I don't believe that it started to include those. I think sometime in the process, they just kind of got looped in.
Okay.
That's what I have, at least. I try to keep it.
So there's been some arbitrariness, some variability as you go up Sunnyside.
Seems that way, yeah. Again, like I said, I don't have any
Okay.
strong feelings
Director
either way,
Teague,
but it was a change mid-process.
All right, thanks, Mr. Olson.
And from what I recollect was the working group wanted to take those two pieces out, and that would be negotiated as part of a development proposal that would come forward, and it could be added at that point.
Yeah, and part of it that I recall, they're both residential, so they're both R1, which is a different zoning designation than the rest of the area. So in general, I believe most of the group was not in favor of including them because you're rezoning something, and that's a pretty big rezone potentially. So that's why they were not included in there. That doesn't mean anyone was necessarily completely opposed to it, but we didn't think it was we didn't want to be presumptuous and include them in there when it was definitely a different zoning piece. That's how I recall it.
Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
Because I think it's really been interesting to me to listen tonight. Some folks talked about, in fact, the gentleman that lives in the condo just north was asking, well, the red line comes around my residence. What does that mean? I think it's really important for people to understand, what does it mean, this red line? I think the red line means that's the area we studied, right? It doesn't mean somebody just outside the red line can't improve their home or whatever, but it probably also strongly implies, and I don't remember reading anything in the plan about, what happens when you want to do something outside this red line.
Well, that's a very good point overall, and I would say that part of the within or without the red line, and we want to make very clear that even if it's within the red line, it's not forcing anyone to do anything. It's not forcing any property owners to sell or to redevelop or anything. To your point, it was more of a study, what we considered the commercial node there, and that happened to be, I think 8 or 10 units. So it's, it's a multifamily. It's a little different. I think it's an R2 designation. I'm not positive, but that was different than the R1 that really surrounded the area. So I think that's why that got included in there. I'm not 100% sure.
If I could just follow up real quick. So with that said, I think certainly there are many implications, if not right out in the plan, it talks about, the intent is not to have the commercial area grow into the residential.
Correct.
I think everyone's clear on that.
Yeah, and that was part of it, and that's what we talked about, those earlier two parcels. We didn't want to have really any creep without the broader discussion with the council and a particular project that may influence it versus us saying, oh, they should be included in this, when we didn't want to get into that.
And I think that's the unique feature that Mr. Carlson brought up, that these 1 or 2 parcels right here on the line affect the transition discussion.
Yeah, I mean,
and I guess that's where I think we're all kind of sitting here wondering, what does that mean now? And we don't have a development proposal to look at, but I think it is an important issue about how we transition to that single-family neighborhood.
Completely agreed, yeah.
Member Staunton.
Just to follow up on that issue, I had a chance to talk with the 2 co-chairs this afternoon about this topic, and with you and other members of the committee here, they were suggesting that there was at least one meeting where there was extensive conversation about this topic, about which of these 2 or either should be included within the bounds of the study, and you landed on 1, not 2. I mean, am I correct about that?
I think that was to address the concerns of the immediate neighborhood.
I think you need to come up and...
You need to come up so we can get it recorded properly.
2 parcels are kind of a mystery.
Would you identify yourself too, please?
Lisa Fagan, 4164 West 44th Street, and I served on the area planning group. But as Eric said, at some point, they seemed to land arbitrarily into the plan, and nobody had an answer as to how they got there. And over time, we were listening to the concerns of the neighbors and the people who sent out the petition. And so I think it was a compromise to at least take one of the parcels out to address those concerns, and then the rest would be addressed through the development process or proposal.
And I guess what I'm driving at is just trying to confirm that it's the intent of the small area plan working group to include 1 but not 2 of those parcels.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
The other issue that Mr. Cook raised, and he qualified it by saying that this might not be the right time to raise this, but he was concerned about, Director Teague, I'm pointing this question at you. He was concerned about, what do we do about concerns about potential height or noise or parking or traffic? And I think he sort of instinctually knew that these would be issues that would be dealt with respect to future projects that might come forward. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct.
Okay.
And I would be glad to meet with Mr. Cook to talk about any he had mentioned questions that he had in regard to his parcel, but I would be glad to meet with the residents there to answer any questions.
Okay. Did any other council members have other questions that I might have missed or concerns that we need to address? Mr. Myrie was looking for some variation on architecture. Wanted to thank the committee and commented on the well-attended meetings. Mr. Myrie did raise one issue, and that was those are some of the visuals that were used, and I think those of us that have been doing this know that doesn't necessarily mean that this is what you're going to see, but there are examples of things that represent the point you're trying to make with respect to the principles involved. And maybe, Mr. Platter, you want to comment on that?
A lot of those pictures were a lot of different areas that, that type of streetscape or something like that would be representative of the types of things you wanted to see. So that wasn't depicting by any means exactly what you would see there, but that would be a guide to what made things happen as far as, more bigger sidewalks, places to sit, more forest there, those types of items.
Mm-hmm.
Biking, those items.
Okay, thank you.
They could have been they probably were from all over the world, actually, so.
Colleagues, there is a resolution 2018-29, that's a resolution approving a comp plan amendment to add the 44th and France small area plan into the city's comprehensive plan. I don't know if, based on the testimony involved, that anyone on the council wishes to modify that resolution as proposed by staff based upon the work of the residents in that area and our study team and the planning commission. Otherwise, we could entertain a motion to adopt resolution 2018-29 as is.
Mr. Mayor,
Member Fisher.
Do we need to close the public hearing and then?
We did. I think we did.
Did we?
Yeah.
Oh, we did. Okay. So then I do have another. Okay.
Sure. Go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up on the floor height thing, because I'm just I'm trying to figure out how I get it that, we've had problems in the past where we talk about floors, but we don't define heights, and these buildings can change a lot. So I don't mind actually putting a stake down and saying, here's what we think are kind of reasonable floor heights. But I think there's also the unintended consequences. If you think about 12 or even 15, I guess I'm more comfortable with 15, but if you think about retail and how it fits with parking, and if you imagine a building, for example, that wants to have retail on the first floor, which typically isn't 12 feet, not in modern retail, but more importantly, if you were to do just say 2 levels of parking, let's say you're doing a development that wants to have retail with some housing above it, and if it's 3 or 4 stories on France, behind it you want to park 2 levels of parking. Well, the 2 levels of parking is 20 feet, so typically you'd make your retail 20 feet and then do your, maybe your 12-foot story or 12-foot stories of housing above that. If we just got to be careful that we're not saying you can't do a 20-foot retail with 2 levels of parking behind, because that might be a really good solution on France Avenue. I don't know, but I don't want to mess with what you're doing, but I want to also realize or make sure we're cognizant of the fact that there may be things coming to us that aren't going to exactly fit in that neat envelope, and we want to kind of have an envelope. I think that's what I'm hearing, but how we would handle that, I don't know.
Member Brindle.
So height is something I've been thinking a lot about, and the 15-foot versus 12-foot story measurement. Is it valid just to say height, overall height of building, without concern for what the stories are, since you could have a tall retail first floor and then some additional stories above it of something else, whether it's additional retail or office or residential. So I'm wondering why, if we want to look at overall maximum heights rather than stories.
My take on that is that we ought to have the stories and the height, that the small area working group was pretty clear on the fact of 4 stories and the 60 feet. Also, if you think about it, we're leaving the zoning code the same. This would go into the comp plan. So this, this doesn't approve anything. This just gives a ceiling for somebody to come in and request. And so we can still make that decision at a later date with respect to a specific application. So if, as Councilmember Fisher was talking about, there's a desire to do the parking or the retail or whatever the particulars of that application are, that gives us the flexibility. We don't have to go all the way to 60 feet, but it would give us the room to go to 60 feet. But I also think it's pretty clear from the neighborhood and the community that participated in this that 4 stories was the maximum they wanted to go to, and I'm not inclined to mess with that compromise.
But we still don't know really what 4 stories means.
Well, 4 stories would mean you could only have 4 stories.
Exactly. But it could be 4 15-foot stories.
Well, sure.
Or
but if you
one
take out the
20-foot
stories,
story and
but if you take out the stories, if you take out the story limitation and just say 60 feet, you could have 5 12-foot stories, and now
Right.
it's a 5-story building instead of a 4-story building.
And you may have, depending upon what's in that building, I mean, it could be very modular, and it could have heights over here that are different than heights over here, just by the nature of what's in it.
They'd have to, according to, or at least the guide from the small area plan would require that as they move into the residential neighborhood, right?
Right.
They would go from 4 stories and 60 feet down to 2 stories.
Stories and 24.
Yep.
Yep.
Or whatever the height limitation is at the neighborhood level. And then over on 44th and Sunny, what is it? 44th and France, you'd be 3 stories.
Right.
And Mr. Mayor, I want to be clear. I think the group has done a lot of hard work, and they've come to some points of, if not agreement, at least, comfort, at least a reasonable comfort. And I think I'm just expressing that there are those maximum parameters, and there probably will have to be some flexibility in the future as we look at real development proposals.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that we have to solve that today. I think Councilmember Staunton kind of hit on it, that we kind of know what that maximum envelope looks like, and just have to be a little flexible within it.
I hadn't thought about parking behind. I guess I had in my head the original proposal was underground parking. And then, to me, I had in my head that a proposal there would look a little bit like 5,000 France, where you got retail on the first floor, requires a little bit more height, parking underground, and then you'd have some variability on the height of the individual floors, but no more than 4 floors and 60 feet in height. So I was real comfortable with what the compromise was that the neighborhood and the team had come to. So I'd support that as well.
It's just, if I could just, sometimes a formula that kind of works is that you can build a 3 or 4 story building. If you imagine, I suppose, along France, you can build, your 2 levels of parking with retail, and you can put a green roof on that, and then you have an outdoor space behind. And, that stuff happens, right? Yeah. I mean, it's an idea, it's a way it can happen. It may never happen here. Who knows? But we just have to be aware that we can't predict, none of us can predict, and it was said earlier, we can't predict the design part of that comes later. We just have to kind of create that envelope, which is what I think has been done pretty well here about what everyone kind of feels fits.
Well, another example is Grand and Victoria, where retail wraps around and in front of parking. You don't even know when you're looking at it that the second story of that building is all parking. It looks like it looks like offices, looks like residential, but it's all parking behind that facade.
Another potential variation on theme.
It could be, and it's a
Yeah.
lot less expensive than going underground.
Also causes me to think about Valley View Wooddale, where when we worked on the Edina Flats project, with the encouragement, I think, of some of the folks on the small area study team down there, they said, why don't you let them go to 30 feet, because the plan required 2-story height limitation and 28 feet.
Mhm.
But that was the same, that was less height allowed than what was allowed for a single-family home.
It was the same
So
argument.
at least match them up with a single-family home, so they got the same ridge line height.
Right.
And that's what we ended up doing, but again, a good envelope guide, as you like to say, Member Staunton. So-
I guess I'd like to talk about the
Study area?
expansion, yeah, the study area, the expansion, to include both of those homes. To include just one almost seems like if you're going to include one, why not both? It just seems funny to me that one would be included and not both. So if we would approve it with one home, the way the study area is, I'm not even sure what I'm looking at. Maybe both homes are in this, or maybe it's just
I
one.
don't think they are.
But if we approve it this way, and then we get a project that comes in, we require a comp plan amendment in order for that project to move forward. Why wouldn't we take care of that now, since this is going to be a comp plan amendment?
Can I?
Interesting point. Yeah, Member Staunton?
Sure. So, you know, one of the things I've been thinking about this as I've watched this process go on, because it's been an extraordinarily robust process, and I actually called Sheila Berube and Jimmy Bennett today to thank them for their work on this, because I think they were the two newest members of the Planning Commission who got the coveted assignment of leading this process. And I just think they did such a terrific job of being authentic about doing their best to try to figure out how to make sure everybody was heard and everybody's passions were channeled in a constructive direction. And they, along with the members of the small area working group, who many of whom are here tonight, just did an incredible job of shepherding this to a compromise that I think there was someone who testified at the Planning Commission who said, everybody's maybe a little unhappy and that's okay.
Yeah, that's what a compromise is.
It made me think about a couple of months ago or a month ago, we had a presentation in one of our work sessions about community engagement. Assistant Manager Schaefer and MJ Lamont had attended a conference and were bringing back some things for us about community engagement. And as all of you know, I've often referred to community engagement as the holy grail of local government. You know, you're constantly searching for it, but it always seems just out of grasp. And they had, I looked back and they had a couple of slides in the presentation that they gave to us, and one of them said, when it works, it reinforces trust and it creates better decisions. And when it doesn't work, it reduces trust and the process is viewed as unfair. And I think this is one of those situations where I don't think we're all the way there with this. This just begins to get us down the path of what happens in this area. But I think there is enough to be gained in the trust reinforcement part of this that I'm not inclined to mess with this carefully crafted compromise. I think the people who've participated in this have done so in good faith and have reached a really good set of consensus about the direction we ought to go. And I'm inclined to support it. And when I think about something like the expansion of the area, the reason I asked the questions I did was I was just interested in what the group decided. And it sounds like there was a long conversation, an hour or longer at a meeting, that went back and forth about which one should be, and they decided on one of the two. And I don't really need to remake that decision for them. And if somebody comes in with a project, as Mr. Carlson's suggesting he might, then we ought to deal with whether to expand it then as part of that application and not as part of the small area plan. And in fact, on the Valley View Wooddale project, we did exactly that. We had a small area plan, and we ended up amending the small area plan to expand it by one property because there was an extra parcel that was purchased. So,
However, that didn't involve permission from the Met Council. That's the hassle that,
well, it did. It didn't have a looming deadline of doing that. And
Right.
certainly,
Right.
you know, if Mr. Carlson's going to come in with a project, you know, I guess we should ask whether it's going to be possible for that to happen or not.
That's important.
But if at all possible, I really don't want to get into the business of evaluating Mr. Carlson's application before we've finished with the small area plan. So I don't know, Carrie, if you have any thoughts about the timeline and whether it would be possible for us to consider an expansion of that small area plan area as part of an application in time for whatever deadline we have.
You might explain the deadline issue, too.
So as I understand it, the Met Council, because all of the cities in the metropolitan area are doing comprehensive plan updates that are due at the end of this year, they are anticipating a flood of proposed plans to come in, and they have told communities, we are not going to accept your garden variety comprehensive plan amendment after June 30th. And so there's a lot of concern that projects that need that kind of amendment won't be able to be evaluated in the second half of this year or longer.
And if Mr. Carlson were to come in with a project that involved a necessary comprehensive plan amendment,
right,
we need to know whether or not, could it be processed?
Would there be enough time for him to process that separate from this process?
So potentially he could. He would have to move really fast, but if he were to submit for the comprehensive plan amendment and the rezoning, everything he needs, it would have to be done before April 25th. He'll be moving through sketch plan review through Planning Commission and City Council the 11th and the 17th. So he would have to finalize his plans basically a week after that sketch plan review. That would put us in a late May Planning Commission cycle for their consideration of the amendment. And then the council would be in June. So we would just we would be able to submit to the Met Council prior to June 30th. So there's
if
potential.
We decided that a comprehensive plan amendment was appropriate. And we could decide that based on that application and not prejudging that application.
Correct.
And Mr. Teague, that seems like a high hurdle. If it's unable to happen on that time frame, how long does the project get put on ice?
So the Met Council takes 6 months to review. Once we submit the plan, it takes them 6 months to go through their review process. So if all goes well and we stay on schedule like we are anticipating, we finish our update by the end of this year, that means the Met Council we couldn't put the plan into effect till June of 2019. So in a sense, it would be it would be a year before he could submit if we were not able to include that lot. Or he could do the development just not having that lot included.
Member Fisher?
So as I'm listening to all of this, I'm hearing us that we could approve something, put it in the comp plan, and then a month later go and amend the comp plan. The Met Council would love that.
that's my point.
We've been dealing with this for 10 years. It feels like that's not a good idea. How do we take this small area plan and the recommendations in it and not, like, I'm fine, let's have the envelope, the height and the stories and all that. But can't we is there a way to do that without adding more height to the comp plan? Right? I mean, ultimately, we want this stuff in our zoning, right? Can you have it, Is it the same when it's within a small area plan? Is that the same or different than when you have, like right now we have our land use, our chapters in our comp plan that have height in it? And that, we have to amend on occasion. But when you have a small area plan within the comp plan, same rules, same application?
It feels like you're switching topics here, because the modification we're talking about is whether or not that single R1 property should be included in this or not included in this, and I don't think there's a height issue with respect to that property.
That's true. I'm just thinking about the whole amendment process with the comp plan.
Yeah.
But you're right, because it's not height, that's going to be in there regardless, so.
What I understood, there was the reason it wasn't included was because it was in an R1 district, and the study area was confined to things other than an R1 district.
But the second property that's also an R1 was included.
That was an R1 too?
Yeah.
Okay. So it did get to be real arbitrary.
The rationale is lost on me, and,
Yeah.
and I agree with Member Staunton that I don't want to reconsider a decision that got made through some very hard work and give and take. But at the same time, I'm feeling the pressure of this looming deadline. I don't know that it's fair either to Mr. Carlson or to the district to have, and therefore the people who use the district, to have this. If we didn't have the Met Council deadline, I wouldn't be hung up on this. But right now, I feel like we are sort of at the mercy of some factors that are, I don't know. It seems like a bad place to be in, and maybe we can.
Even without the deadline, though, to Member Fisher's point,
Right.
if Mr. Carlson came forward with a project that we thought was beneficial to the development of that property, the Edina Realty property, and beneficial to the neighborhood by creating a better buffer, and he brought it in July or August, we'd still be potentially amending a comp plan within just a few months of when we originally set up the original amendment.
Amending it for a reason other than this one property?
No, just for that one property. So to me, I'd rather address that addition of the single lot now. I saw Mr. Platter go over to talk to Director Teague. I don't know if that was something we need to know about or not, but I mean, it seems to me that addressing this, Member Staunton made some very great points, I thought, but I also think it warrants a little bit more discussion as to whether or not we had to move one more lot further west on Sunnyside and pick up that second R1 lot tonight.
Yeah, the question that was asked was, do we need to amend the comprehensive? If shifting that, could we not shift that line, and would it still be a comprehensive plan amendment to include it in a rezoning? And the answer is it would, because we would be, right now, as the plan is proposed, that second single-family lot is guided for low-density residential development, essentially the single-family home district. So we would need to include that extension of the boundary, so it would be included within the neighborhood node that would allow the multifamily residential as part of it.
No, sorry. He's on the committee. He didn't ask a question of the council, Director Teague, so, I mean, that's not a distinction. But the hearing is closed, so it's really a council discussion at this point in time, plus the committee itself.
You want a motion?
Let me go back to the resolution here.
Well, it would be a motion before
Before the resolution?
Before the resolution.
To include that other R1 lot?
Yes, to expand.
Do we know the address of that property? And is this a 3/5 vote or a 4/5 vote? To include the lot is a 4/5?
Well,
The entire plan requires a 4/5
To adopt the
vote.
comprehensive plan amendment takes a 4/5 vote.
How
But
about,
the question here is whether or not Member Brindle makes a motion to add that R1 lot to the study area. And then, so the question is, does that require a 4/5 vote? Because we haven't voted on the small area plan. We haven't voted on the comp plan amendment yet.
An amendment.
Doesn't matter. It seems like it's,
If you move to add that, that would take a majority vote. But if, to adopt it as, with that in there, takes
Yes.
4 votes.
yep, got it.
do you know the address of that property?
yes, it is 3907 Sunnyside Road.
I'll make a motion that we expand the project area at 44th and France in the small area plan to include 3907 West 44th Street. Oh, Sunnyside Road.
3907?
3907 Sunnyside Road.
Is there a second?
The council can ask for our opinion as the residents here.
Is there a second? I'll second it for discussion. Any further discussion? What are the consequences of including it in the small area plan study downstream?
It doesn't bind you to a future rezoning. You're still considering, you still have the ability, the discretion to approve or deny a rezoning. The height limits are still 2 stories, 24 feet, so you have discretion over extending any height greater than that. It would mean that Mr. Carlson wouldn't need a comprehensive plan amendment as part of his project. He would just need the rezoning.
Mr. Teague, do you know if Mr. Carlson has an option or otherwise has control on that property, or whether or not the property owner has a view?
I believe he has control of those 2 lots. Could I ask a question for clarification? Does the motion include, Mr. Smith had indicated the discrepancy on the density that's allowed? So what that would include would be that table on page 42 that refers to the 30 units an acre max?
No.
Well, that would come up in the next resolution, in the resolution.
Okay. Nope, this is just
Just to-
expanding
This is
the
just to
area by
expand.
one property.
This is
Mr.
to
Mayor.
expand, the question is whether we want to expand the study area for 44th and France small area plan to include the property located at 3907 Sunnyside Road. Member Fisher?
And what I'm struggling with here is, we've all talked about that there's going to be a conversation about, apparently, about a development proposal that's going to potentially impact these 2 lots. So we're sort of faced with, at least I'm trying to clarify this in my own head, we're faced with approving a plan just as it's written today, with the boundaries just as they exist, knowing that we're going to have a discussion about that red line and whether or not we slide it by 1 lot.
Right.
Is it better to, to approve a plan just as it's written and then come back potentially a month from now or 2 months from now and change it, as we did in the Valley View area? Or
That
just
was
say,
actually a year or so later.
well, yeah, it was a bit later, but, or is it better to just change it? By changing it now, we're just avoiding going through the whole comp plan process,
Well,
essentially.
and I think the question I just asked, for me, is rather dispositive. If Mr. Carlson already has an option and has control on that property, if his intention is to come to us with a proposal, and when I look at where the line bends, the property next door that he already owns where the driveway is, does go all the way to the end of that 3907 property. So Member Fisher, I think, yes, I think my answer to your question is I'd rather just address it now than have to readdress it in a very short time.
And you just made an interesting point. So that property actually does align with the corner of the property immediately kind of to the south,
Right.
which in theory would make it a contiguous piece. And that's the struggle I'm having, is why is the line there versus one way or another?
And I think you heard folks say it was arbitrary. So we've got a motion and a second to expand the study area for the 44th and France Small Area Plan to include the property located at 3907 West Sunnyside Road. Any further discussion? This is a simple majority vote.
Correct.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Carried. All right, now we've got a resolution. Director Teague, would you take a look at the resolution? I think it's paragraph 1.06 that you may want to look at, maximum density, or add some language to 106.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. It looks like we are covered. Just that is the language that's consistent with the executive summary.
Okay, all right. So we've got a resolution 2018-29, which approves the comprehensive plan amendment to add the 44th and France Small Area Plan into the city's comprehensive plan. This does require a supermajority vote. Any further discussion?
Mayor, just one point. That includes the corrections that were pointed out. You're incorporating those corrections into the plan?
Correct. All right.
We need a motion and a second?
We need a motion and a second, yep.
So moved.
Second? Got a second? Okay, we got a motion and a second on resolution 2018-29 with the changes discussed. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right. Interesting discussion. And again, thanks for that fantastic work, and for the neighbors that are still here, all your wonderful input into this process. A couple of the times I think I went over there to the church basement, there were some emotions flying around, and I think everybody's handled this in just a wonderful sort of way, and it's been a real neighborly, professional exercise, and we came to a good result together. So thanks.
Mr.
Thanks
Mayor,
for all your input.
Can I just add one comment? So what's significant about this is, and this is hard, that simple line movement. In my mind, we're simply trying to create an opportunity to measure a project if it comes to us. But the key is, it's really about those 11 principles. If this project can't deliver on that transition to the single-family neighborhood, that's going to be the key, those 11 principles. And at least in my mind, I think this was the most effective way to take this plan and get it into the comp plan and start it tonight. So thank you. Thanks for all the hard work.
Thanks for the good work. All right.
And thanks to everybody in the neighborhood that participated. It was really, there was a lot of great input, and it was hard to hash through all of that. I think the committee did a great job.
All right. That completes the public hearing portion of the agenda this evening. We're going to move on to reports and recommendations. Manager Neal, you've got the first matter here, and that is a potential amendment of the Edina affordable housing policy.
I do. Thank you, Your Honor. This proposed amendment to the city's affordable housing policy seeks to make a couple of changes, and I'll outline those changes and then come back and answer questions to council. The current affordable housing policy does allow multiple ways for developers to comply with the policy. One is to provide actual units, living units that comply with our policy terms for a period of time, a certain percentage for a certain period of time. Another way that developers can comply with our affordable housing affordable housing policy is that they can offer a negotiated buy-in amount that the city can then use to leverage other affordable housing projects in perhaps other parts of the city. So that exists already in our affordable housing policy and has since the beginning, those two options. One of the things that from a staff standpoint that we have encountered is just the unstructured nature of those discussions, because that buy-in fee isn't connected to a per unit cost or some standard. We have not found that to be very helpful. I think the idea initially was that it would allow us to be creative. I think that's not how it has actually turned out in actual practice. We have one experience with receiving the buy-in fee. It's interesting, when I talk to my peers and other housing folks across the Twin Cities, they think we're getting these buy-in fees all the time. But we really have received one since we adopted the affordable housing policy. And that was the negotiation that we entered into with Opus on the Loden project. That project turned out to be, I think I said $83,000 per unit is what the per unit cost, or the per unit basis of the buy-in fee was. It was a $2 million spread over their affordable housing obligation. So what we're proposing tonight to the council is something we had previously run by the HRA, and that is to establish a firm number, to have the city council amend the policy and establish a firm number that we can use when we are having our preliminary discussions with developers. They can then use that number as a gauge to whether they're going to provide units or whether they're going to provide money. And they can use that number as a dependable, reliable, fixed fee that they can run through their pro formas. And we think this will lead to better decision making on their part, and maybe it will lead to more units as well. The other proposed changes that we're proposing to make is to make the cash or certified funds payable at the time of the issuance of the building permit. This is essentially, for us, receiving that money up front. We've had experience with developers where that is not their preference, but in terms of securing our best access at the milestone where we have the most leverage, it is at building permit time. They would probably prefer that they have the ability to pay at the issuance of the certificate of occupancy. We think there's risk to that, because that if we wait to receive that money at that time in the project, we would essentially be not allowing people to move into a brand new $50 million apartment building. And that's difficult to do politically, and it's difficult to do from a regulatory standpoint. So that's our preference, and that's what we're recommending to you, but I want you to know that's not the preference of the people that we're dealing with. And the other item that we've had previous discussion about is whether or not we would allow housing developers to prepay their buy-in, a total buy-in. And this was the discussion we had about whether or not Ryan Construction could, there was a discussion about Ryan Construction was going to be into an agreement with an affordable housing developer. Could they pay some money up front that would create credits that they could use on a future project that they would build in the very near future? We didn't really come to a consensus, I felt, on the city council on that issue. So all we're saying, I had a lot of additional language in the previous version of this. What we've boiled it down to say is that the council may allow a housing developer to prepay their buy-in fee on a case-by-case basis. And that's the extent of the presentation. I'm happy to answer questions about this.
Yeah, right. A couple of questions. I noticed that there's a version, a revised version of our affordable housing policy in the packet that indicates it was revised as of February 28th?
Right. I think we provided, initially provided you a version of our affordable housing
February
policy that
7th.
was not the most current version, and we've updated that.
So I don't recall us revising it as of February. Do we know what the language was that changed?
It was, that was the recommended revisions from the Edina Housing Foundation to include owner-occupied housing similar to the rentals. That's really the essence of the changes that were made, was to specifically address owner-occupied housing. So that is the language that the council adopted in February, as recommended by the Housing
So the
Foundation.
page 3 language on ownership housing was added on?
Correct.
Okay. And just one other question with respect to paragraph 8 of the policy. That's the policy that talks about the fact that strong preference of the city that each new qualifying development provide its proportionate share of affordable housing. However, the city recognizes it may not be economically feasible or practical in all situations to do so, and then it gives some other options. None of those options specifically talk about a payment, but item D is an alternative proposed by a developer that directly or indirectly provides or enables provision of an equivalent amount of affordable housing within the city. That's the paragraph that
Right.
we're fitting this payment
Right.
into. All right, thank you.
Mr. Mayor. Scott, could you clarify, what do we know about, like, how many cities in Minnesota are requiring affordable housing at all as a portion of development projects?
Well, maybe Mr. Teague and I can both take a crack at this.
And if you're going to do that, it's a two-part. So
Okay.
how many cities do we know of that are even requiring it? And then how many cities are contemplating the buy-in? I think I heard you say that we might be the first doing the buy-in.
Right. I have talked to my peer group in the Twin Cities, and I've also talked to some representatives from the Metropolitan Council. When we talk about what we're talking about in terms of requiring affordable units in market rate projects, typically is called an inclusionary zoning ordinance or inclusionary zoning policy. There are a lot of cities that have something very close to that. I think our ordinance is closer than anybody else's, and I'll ask Mr. Teague if he'll comment on that part.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't believe any city has a specific zoning for inclusionary housing. Cities have policies to require it as part of a rezoning. I think of St. Louis Park, Minnetonka, but not a specific code or inclusionary zoning ordinance.
In reference to your second question, Councilmember Fisher, talking to that same group of people, kind of the city manager, city administrator group, but also the Metropolitan Council, they've told me there isn't any other city that has the buy-in procedure that we have that allows a developer to contribute money to future affordable housing projects.
What I'm trying to figure out is where we sit from a competitiveness nature. So I'm still not clear, based on Mr. Teague's answer, are other cities requiring developers to spend money in their projects to put affordable housing in those units? So in other words, if they say, well, Edina, we're not going to pay that money here, we're just going to go right here. We'll go to the next city over. Is that, you say it's in our zoning, but it's not in theirs. It's a policy. Do they have to do it or don't they? I guess that's my question. I get, because for years every time a project came to the Planning Commission, I remember saying, "Boy, it'd be nice to have affordable housing," but that's as far as we could go. That was a policy, but a requirement is different.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know? Are they being required to do it in other places?
When Councilmember Fisher, when I've talked to my peer group, you get a variety of soft responses to that question, and those responses are typically We don't require it. It's not part of our ordinance, but sometimes we get it, right? And I would say that's where we were probably 5 years ago as well. We could use as an incentive with developers to give us 5% or a certain number of units. We'll do our best to get you through our regulatory process a little quicker maybe, or this will be a lot, the council will give you a much favorable review if they know that you're contributing some affordable units. I think other cities do that too. I think St. Louis Park can do that. I know that Minnetonka has done that from time to time. But in terms of having a true inclusionary zoning policy or ordinance or something like that, I don't think so.
I think St. Louis Park does have an inclusionary zoning ordinance, but I don't know how many do. I think a lot of people just use the voting method like we use.
Right, and Mr. Teague just mentioned kind of one of the keys for us is the PUD, is the planned unit development. So if you organize your regulatory process for multifamily units around or via a planned unit development tool, any city could make that into an inclusionary zoning policy, I suspect.
Thank you. Just thinking through that out loud, it seems to me we've already crossed the Rubicon on whether or not to require affordable housing for this group of development for more than 20 units of multifamily. And since we're already requiring it, if the paying money in lieu of actually building the units is going to be an option, it seems to me that that's just a different approach to trying to solve the same puzzle. And for me, my preference would be that they actually build the units, because in the end we want the units. If they're going to buy out, it's my preference that they, if anything, would pay a premium. I feel like these numbers that we've used are discounted from the actual cost of performing, and I think that's a mistake. I think the 83,000 per unit was too low. I think 100 is too low. So it seems to me that if we're going to set a bar, we ought to set it a bit higher.
Can I chime in with one other issue? City Manager Neal, in your memorandum, you proposed 3 paragraphs to amend our policy, the first of which talks about a housing developer's affordable housing obligation remains at a minimum of 10% of the total units proposed for developments exceeding 20 units. I guess I'd suggest if we're going to adopt some amendments, we make sure in reference, we actually have a dual obligation. Yeah. It's 10%
right.
At 50% AMI, but 20% at 60% AMI. So I think we'll need to reflect that.
Agreed.
Good catch. For me, I'm comfortable with the analysis that staff has gone through here, leading the way in Minnesota on the new phraseology that Member Staunton has created, the buy-in, which is now memorialized as the buy-in amount, the BMA, the BIA. As long as Manager Neal's using all these acronyms here. I'm comfortable with that buy-in amount that's been calculated by staff to be appropriate. It is tricky work, I think. I understand what Member Stewart is saying, but you have to be somewhat market sensitive, and I'm also sensitive to what Member Fisher raised as an issue, and that is, how do we know we're not scaring people off? At what point are we scaring people off? You know, what amount is too much? So far, we haven't had resistance on this number. The issue that I wanted to talk a little bit about was number 2, as to when the money is due. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world to me that your best chance to get it is when they need a building permit. But now, if you've got a 2-year lead time on your project before you get anybody in there, you've given, in addition to the building permit money, you've given the city $1.8 million that you have to carry the carrying costs on for 2 years. And I don't know if there are other points along the line in addition to the building permit point, between the building permit point and the certificate of occupancy, where you could require installment payments. I'm not so sure that's a great idea either. But I'm also wondering, in a way, we're holding on to their money until they complete their project. Should we get the benefit of that interest that's earned on that $1.8 million, or should that belong to them? To me, that's another thing that we haven't talked about, and I'd like to hear what my colleagues think about it, you know, because they have, in some instances, then decided that based on the number of doors, they're going to pay $100,000 a piece, and they're going to pay it when they get the building permit. But they're not going to have a building there for 2 years. Remember, Stuart?
I'm not overly troubled by that. The timing doesn't match perfectly no matter which way you do it. And but if the city has the money, it can then put the money to work to start building the units that otherwise it would have gotten at the end of the project. So you might get the units at the same time, and so that makes some sense to me to do it that way.
Put the money to work somewhere else right away. Yeah,
Right.
that's a good point.
But
Member Brindle.
as I've heard developers talk about this, the time when they can pay that is when they get their financing, not at the building permit. They don't get their financing at the building permit. They get their financing later after they get their building permit.
But well before the certificate of occupancy.
Right, but well before certificate of occupancy.
I don't think anybody would start a project and go get a building permit unless they had financing in place.
Yeah, we typically find that they're securing their financing right during the final regulatory approvals of the council.
Okay.
So
Before a permit.
right before permit.
Okay.
So after
All
you
right.
give them their final approval, and Mr. Teague gets all the documents signed off, that's what they need to take to
Okay.
their lenders, and then they're getting financed from there.
Okay.
Can I just chime in? So I think the most important thing, and I appreciate this conversation about what's the right number, and we had this conversation previously, where we've been having this conversation a lot. But one thing I know for sure is that putting a stake in the ground is the right thing to do. I mean, our experience, it was back in the fall of 2015 that we adopted our policy. And if you recall, you know, a couple of these projects kind of slipped through before we got the policy adopted. We were concerned that it wasn't fair because they had already entered into a transaction before knowing the policy. But since then, people have just bellied up and complied with it. So I think the lesson is, let's put a stake in the ground. We can adjust it. I think the problem that Councilmember Fisher, I think, has put his finger on is we don't have anybody else to guide off of, so it's hard to know what the right number is. So, you know, I'm comfortable with 100,000, but if it's 120,000, I mean, I just think whatever it is, we need to pick a number and we need to move forward.
Well, Seattle, in 2014, went through this process and came up with a fee, a pay per square foot of the building. And what they do is they determine by where the building is what that per square foot fee is going to be, and that's what the developer pays if he's not going to put affordable housing in his building. And then, in like manner, that fee comes to the city, and the city puts that forward into workforce housing somewhere else in the city.
So tying it to the market value of the property
Right.
where the development's happening.
Right.
We have found through some research that pay per square footage metric is pretty common on the West Coast, in California cities that
Okay.
are trying to address this issue. But in other parts of the country, they're using the unit basis like we are.
Mr. Mayor.
So, yes, Member Fisher.
So I do think putting a stake in the ground is really important, because the best thing we can deliver to the development community is clarity, right? So they know early on when they're contemplating a project here, what's all going to go into it. They don't have to worry about the negotiation. What if, because we go through sketch plan a lot of times before they've really sat down with staff to figure out these things. And so we could all be excited about a project, and then they find out that what we're requiring is not affordable. But with that in mind, I want to be a little careful that we don't overshoot. All right, I'd rather come in, I think, higher than what we did in that first one, but not. I guess what I'm saying, I'm comfortable with the 100,000, and I try to play this through in my head. That if we, first of all, we know that land is at a premium in Edina, right? So I keep thinking that if there are developers building a project in our city, and pick any neighboring city, just assume the construction cost, the same project is going to cost the same to build in both places. So then if our land value is higher, they're going to have to pay more for that land. It means already they have to charge higher rents or sale prices here than they do there. So they have to factor that in, because the construction's fixed. So we're adding on, let's just say it's just for discussion purposes, it's a 150 unit building, and we're going to require a buy-in of 15 units at 100,000. That's a $1.5 million premium on top of the premium. And I think about that, that's more than they're going to pay in these other cities, because it doesn't exist anywhere else. And again, I think it's important to do. But what none of us know here right now, because none of us are developers, is that too much? Is that going to kill the deal? And it feels like in some of our test cases, it hasn't yet that we know of. But the deals that we have seen where we've been able to look at the pro formas, where there's like TIF or some other thing involved, I think what surprised me is just how narrow the profit margins really are. Because I think we all have a perception, I think all of us have a perception that developers are just rolling in the dough. But I do think that it's challenging because of the premium land prices, which, by the way, is what's driving the taller buildings. It's driving the luxury component, because they have to drive as much revenue as they can possibly get. So I guess what I'm asking is, I think the 100,000 is the place to start. And if other communities, and hopefully they do, that other communities jump into this and realize this is a way we can build affordable units, then maybe we can leverage that at some other point. But if we make the gap this big, they're just gonna, and they know about it ahead of time. That's the downside, is everyone knows the rules. We may not even hear from them, right? Because they're gonna be over there building, and then we're not gonna get those affordable units. And the other thing that I think is really important in this is the difference between, and I know we've talked a lot about this, Councilmember Stewart and I, you would prefer to have them build it in all of these projects, and that would be ideal. And I was watching the Planning Commission meeting on the Guitar Center site, and a number of the planning commissioners said, they should have affordable housing in this building because it's a perfect location, and they're right. It's a perfect location to have affordable units, except that it's a luxury, an ultimate sort of a high luxury building. In that case, if we can get the buy-in and build the units in the neighborhood, but in a project where, and the difference I look at, if they're built in that Guitar Center project, they will not be, in 15 years and 1 day from the time it's built, there will be no affordable units in the city of Edina in that location. I know that. And if we take that buy-in and build something different, we can assure long-term affordable housing. So I'm willing to give up a little bit in that process to make sure we have long-term affordable housing. And the other factor, not to belabor this too much, is that we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that I feel like as we're building all this housing, we also have to figure out a way to get park dedication. Because we're bringing a lot more people in, and we're not expanding the funds for our parks. Another really important element. And then there's the whole sustainability thing. So if we go too big right away on the affordable housing component, there's nothing left to get some of the other things we're going to need. So with all of that long-winded talking, I'm just saying, I think the staff recommendation is pretty good at 100.
That's good. Thanks for that, those thoughts. All right, so the action requested is to approve the proposed amendment of the city's affordable housing policy to establish a buy-in amount of $100,000 per unit. But it's actually a little bit more than that. There's more elements to it. So, Manager Neal, you had your...
I did. I was just going to point out, Your Honor, that number one, I think I was just trying to include number one and those extra three at the end, just to remind ourselves that we're not changing that part. So I would say you can delete that. That wasn't an attempt to change anything.
You can delete what?
Number under the staff further
memo?
recommends.
Yep.
Yeah.
So delete 2 and 3?
I'm proposing just number one, because
Just deleting number 1?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Say that again.
He's proposing to just keep 2 and 3 of his, paragraphs 2 and 3 of his supplemental recommendation.
of the supplemental, correct,
the 1, 2,
and then
3.
to establish
And
the
establish
buy-in
$100,000.
number at 100,000 with the understanding that it's a number that you'll review on an annual basis and change as necessary.
All right. So is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
So you got a motion, we got a second?
Second?
Motion and a second. On the motion as stated by Manager Neal. Any further discussion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Just one thing
Member
about
Stewart.
it. So should we, in the near future, Mr. Neal, should we be looking at the park dedication fee policy and making a change to that, since Member Fisher brought that up?
There's some limitations there, I think.
There's some big
Well,
limitations.
as I noticed that our state representative is in the audience tonight, that is where that issue needs to be resolved,
Yes.
actually. So
It's a state statute.
the situation with our park dedication fee is not, the remedy isn't at the local level, it's at the state level, because right now the way that statute is connected, it's connected to subdivision of land. And so many of what we see happening here is not subdivision of land, sometimes it's aggregation of land to build something that has more units, more people, when there probably were no people there before. It was an older commercial building of some kind. So
Well, I'm glad I brought it up, because I know Mr. Anselmo will do something about it.
that situation isn't contemplated in the statute. So that's really where we need to look for that remedy.
So it really does put like a first-ring suburb like ours in a really precarious situation, because we're adding population and we don't have a vehicle to help kind of create new park area.
Exactly.
And other cities are experiencing the similar thing now.
So we should probably be able to find like-minded folks that we could probably make a concerted
Right.
effort.
We are.
Exactly.
Okay.
We can do that through the MLC.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good thought. All right. We got a motion, we got a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion as stated by Manager Neal, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then Resolution 2018-30 is the motion we see every couple of weeks with respect to donations, proposed donations to the city. We've got some significant donations this time. Is there anyone that wants to move, any council member move Resolution 2018-30?
So moved.
All right.
Second.
Need a second? Resolution 2018-30, accepting donations on behalf of the city of Edina. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. We've got some in-kind donations from Coral and Dahlstrom. Art Academy supplies for the Edina Art Center. And then we've got a substantial gift from the Edina Crime Fund. Edina Fall into the Arts Festival proceeds $13,000 to the Park and Rec Department for use at Centennial Lakes. I don't know if either Member Staunton or Member Brindle would want to comment on that, but both serving on the Crime Fund Board.
I can comment. Fall into the Arts is an annual event. It'll take place on the weekend after Labor Day in September, on Saturday and Sunday of that weekend. It is a The revenues from the event go to the Edina Crime Prevention Fund, and then a portion of those revenues go to the Edina Art Center, and they go to Centennial Lake. So this is the portion from the 2017 festival that goes to Centennial Lakes.
Good, thank you. And then the Edina Police Department received a grant from AAA for, it's a teen safe driving grant. Chief, any comment on it? $2,000 grant?
Yes, it's an annual grant that we've been receiving for a few years now, and we use the money that they donate to the police department to buy kind of the prizes and that for raffle drawings for when we're doing the Teen Safe Driving Initiative out at the high school.
All right, good, thank you. All right, that completes the reports and recommendations portion of the agenda this evening.
A few years ago, when they did that teen safe driving thing, they brought on a flatbed, they brought a car wreck over to the high school so the kids could see what a little distracted driving may result in. And it was, I think, very powerful because I remember my children talking about it. Do they still do something like that?
Usually they do that every other year, so yes, they do.
Thanks, Chief. Correspondence of petitions, anything other than what we had in the dais this evening, Manager Neal?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Aviation noise update, Member Brindle. Anything?
Thank you. Last meeting, I reported that the MD-80 aircraft were phasing out in April of 2018. The MD-90s will phase out in the summer of 2019. So the MD-80s are by large the loudest. So getting rid of those is definitely going to have an effect. The MD-90s are quieter. They're short-haul airplanes. They're smaller, but they're still louder than some of the Airbuses and some of the new Endeavors and the Bombardiers. So making progress on noise.
I have to say I have a hard time giving a lot of credit to Delta because when Northwest was here, we didn't have those aircraft. Delta brought them here after they bought Northwest, and then they gave us the loud airplanes.
Well, actually, they came here. Delta didn't initially bring them here until they realized that we're in the middle of the United States and they can do short trips to the coasts. They don't need the aircraft that go from coast to coast. They can have some of the smaller, louder aircraft here. So that's how we ended up with them. But they are being retired.
Good to hear.
Yeah. Lots of great work going on.
No matter how short the trip is on an MD-90, it's a miserable experience.
It is. It is.
I've noticed that Councilmember Brindle has gotten to be quite an expert on these. I mean, she's throwing these terms around like that. I picture her with a wrench, and they're like opening up the hood, and she's under there looking.
It's really a great committee, and you do learn a lot. It's a group of very engaging people, and just a quick story. During one of the Noise Oversight Committee meetings, there was a monster commercial airplane, one of these guppy sort of big things came in. And there are industry representatives on the Noise Oversight Committee, and they are all, airplanes, since they were little kids, I swear, they didn't have train sets, they had airplanes. And they all picked up their phones. They all got the same text at the same time that this thing was coming in. So out they went. And they stood by on the front and they watched it come in, they watched it land, and then they came in and sat down and had the rest of the meeting. They're airplane junkies, and they're the right people to have in it. But yeah, it's a great committee.
All right, Manager Neal, any tales from the aviation industry that you want to share?
No tales from the aviation industry for me tonight, thanks.
All right. Council comments, Member Fisher?
I don't have anything tonight.
Okay. Member Staunton?
A couple of things, Mr. Mayor. First, I wanted to mention that on the 21st and 22nd of March, In my capacity as a member of the board of the League of Minnesota Cities, I participated in our monthly board meeting, but it was also part of the League's annual legislative day. And for the last couple of years, what the League has done is held a seminar for city officials from around the state to come and learn about what the issues are at the state capitol and get a little bit of training on how to go encourage their representatives to do the right thing. And so they do a half day or longer of training and then turn them loose on the state capitol. And it was a great day of exchanging stories with folks from around the state. And in terms of the legislative agenda, we've talked about some of the issues here. Preemption remains a big issue. Cities continue to be subject to legislation that wants to preempt our ability to tailor our own legislation to our own communities. And as I have said before at this microphone, nobody in this community seems to have difficulty finding me if they are unhappy with the decision that I've made. They know where we meet twice a month, and they seem to be able to find me at home or in the grocery store or whatever, and I think the rest of my colleagues would agree that we don't have any trouble being accountable for the actions that we take. So I would encourage our legislators to continue to work against any unnecessary preemption legislation. So that was the first item. The second item was, and I'm going to lift this thing.
Man.
Oh, that thing is so heavy.
Put it up here. Maybe get a look at it. I had the good fortune to attend last Wednesday the Clean Energy Resource Team's state convention, where the city of Edina was awarded, and if I can read this backwards,
Look at your screen.
Oh, there we go, is recognized for its achievement in advancing Minnesota's clean energy goals through energy conservation, efficiency, and renewable energy. Many of the council members will remember that in 2015, the Energy and Environment Commission approached the council and challenged us to put specific action items behind our goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the city. And we stepped up to that challenge. We worked with Xcel Energy in the Partners in Energy program to create an electricity action plan. We made the investment in hiring a sustainability officer, Tara Brown, who's been terrific, and she's been updating us on the progress. And we've taken a number of steps to encourage folks to both conserve energy as well as shift to different, more renewable types of energy. And one of the things that those efforts have resulted in is this award. We were one of 7 cities, I think, that received awards at this convention for our efforts in this area. And what I want to be clear about, and I want to just quote Tara because I talked to her this afternoon, and she made a great point. She said, if I can get my computer to respond, which I can't. She said, to summarize, we've started the process to engage the community, but it isn't over with receiving this reward. It's just beginning. So this is a nice piece of recognition, but it's a reminder that we have much to do. And as Councilmember Fisher mentioned just a moment ago, this is one of the things we can do with applicants. Affordable housing is one of the things we're looking for, but sustainability actions are another thing we're looking for. So I'm proud on behalf of the city to accept this award for our efforts and mark the effort to move forward.
Cool.
That's all I have, Mr.
Thank
Mayor.
you. Member Staunton, that's terrific. Was that up in St. Cloud?
It was in St. Cloud.
Yeah, thanks for going up there. Member Brendel.
Thank you. Director Milner, with the street reconstruction projects, what is the follow-on? We've talked about this, but I don't remember, but I guess I'd like to more formally receive, what is the maintenance schedule to maintain those streets with seal coating or whatever it might be to make sure that our new streets last as long as possible before they start cracking, before they start having other difficulties?
Councilmember Brindle, if you recall, we asked for some, we presented at a work session the needs of the streets and their maintenance activities to try to get that life of a street to 50 years. They're designed initially for 20 to 25 years, but with maintenance, we think we can get to 50. You approved a budget for that, and then it increased it this year again. Our typical practice is a seal coat in the first 5 to 7 years, a mill and overlay around 20, another mill and overlay in 30, and then one more towards in that 40 range. So it's kind of 4 to 5 operations over that life to really extend that pavement.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
All right, and so I was going through the CIP today, and we've got new park building, new park building, new park building for all of our parks that have old buildings. And those projects are not moving forward because they are not funded. And those buildings look terrible. And so I guess I would like to have us think about what would it take to put together some sort of a funding task force to look at where can we, where can we get sponsors? Where can we look to involve our business community? Lewis Park comes to mind. Dow Film Tech adopted that park. How could we approach Dow Film Tech and say that the building at Lewis Park needs updating, and we'd love to have you be a partner in doing that? And looking at Strawcower Park, that's another park where the building is scheduled for this year. Lewis is scheduled for this year. And it's not going to happen because there's no funding. So I guess I'd like to look at and kind of wrestle with the funding problem to see what we can discover and where we can find some partners. So I'm just going to throw that out there.
Right. Manager Neal wants to respond.
Well, this, Your Honor, members of council, I mentioned earlier tonight in the work session, this is a CIP year. One of the things that's going to be different this year, particularly in the CIP year, than previous CIP years, is that earlier, I guess later in 2017, when you approved the budget plan for 2018 and 19, you approved a fairly aggressive capital improvements funding plan in that budget. And remember, we talked a lot about some levies that were going to be coming due in the next couple of years and capturing those levies and putting them right into our CIP. This is the year that you will do that, and you will actually get to program some of that new money for projects that you wouldn't have had the opportunity to do before.
So we do have levies that are retiring?
We do.
This year?
Not this year, but within the CIP timeframe. So within that 5-year CIP timeframe, there is one and possibly two. But you will get to program that money this year, and that's different. And we also have levy money that we haven't previously had. So really what we've been trying to do is to provide you enough money to do those projects that you can depend on. Part of our issues in the past is we've had money for CIP spending, but it wasn't dependable. If the liquor stores had a great year, you had more. If they didn't have a great year, you had none.
Right.
If we had a lot of money left over from the year before, you had some, but if we didn't, you didn't. So this provides you a level funding stream going out, and that'll be different from CIPs that we've done in the past.
But Member Brindle's idea of having sort of this corporate citizen co-sponsorship, is there merit to that?
There could be, and so I'm not saying that's I'm not trying to steer away from that idea. I'm just telling you that this year the CIP will be different than previous years. I think you won't have nearly as many unfunded projects as you have in previous years.
Okay. All right.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Member Stewart.
Thank you. Just a couple of things very quickly. We had an HRA meeting on the 29th. Just a reminder to everybody who's paying attention here that HRA meetings are now on Thursday morning, so we'll be having one on April 12th and another on April 26th. We meet at 7:30 in the morning in the community room, and those are open to everybody. The only other thing, recently, on the 29th, the mayor and I attended an open house for Minnesota State University in Mankato. They have a site in Edina at 7700 France. They've expanded and have just put together a beautiful facility there. They're doing some really good work, educating people, a lot of them for masters and higher programs, and some very interesting specific units going on. So for anybody who's got an interest in education and continuing their education here in Edina, there's a great facility for everybody right there. So thank you.
Good, thank you. Yeah, Manager Neal was there as well, and thank you for attending. And Member Stewart was requesting that they rename the university Minnesota State University Mankato / Edina, as I recall, and they were receptive to the idea. So we're now a college town, which is a good thing, always a good thing. My schedule back on the 21st, after our last meeting, our last council meeting, had a tab meeting the next day. On the 22nd of March, Manager Neal and I met with the county administrator, Dave Huff, to talk about the library site at 70th and York. And that work continues jointly with the county. I think they're trying to get tightened up a little bit on how much square footage they need for the library. They seem to be heading in a good direction, still want us as a development partner. And so more to come on that. That same evening, I got there a little bit late over at the Grange Hall across the street. They were doing a history review on Edina's Sarah Baird, and that was who was involved in the Grange movement early on, and that was an interesting historical perspective as well. And then on Friday the 23rd at noon, I went over to the 50th in France merchant meeting and participated with those folks in discussing some of the issues we face on an ongoing basis with respect to the project on Market Street and how to adjust and make sure that we're assuring there's parking for customers and making life as painless as possible under the circumstances. Use of valet, that's been an evolving situation. I think Manager Neal's going to comment a little bit on that, but those are just my quick oversight comments there. Had a Southwest LRT meeting on the 28th. I had Deb Mangan send all of you the animation involving Eden Prairie. I hope you all got it. You could see that from that animation, those 3 stations in Eden Prairie, it's a game changer for a community in terms of how it's going to impact them, and it's impressive. For all those lines, those towns along the line, they're going to see some nice changes from an economic development standpoint. Had a quarterly mayor's meeting, West Suburban mayor's meeting over in St. Louis Park on the 29th, attended by Molly Cummings, mayor of Hopkins. Brad Wearsome, the new mayor of Minnetonka, was there for a while, then rushed off to the legislature. Jacob Fry came to visit with us as well, so we had him for an hour. And then Jake Spano was the host, so we discussed some of the things that we have going on in common. And then on the 30th, last Friday, I went over to Williams Arena, invited over there by the Edina robotics team, the Green Machine. And I just have to pass on this compliment that came from Russ Anderson, who is one of the parents up in Greenbush, Minnesota. Greenbush Middle River is a consolidated school district. They've got 320 kids in their school district from age K through 12. They've got a third of their kids in robotics, and they just started being involved in robotics in 2014. And the reason they got involved and who they called to help them understand what it was all about was Edina. And Russ Anderson, who owns a feed ingredient business up there, told me that we should all be really proud of our kids. They're the leaders in the state on helping other kids get started with their robotics team. He said it's by far they are the best leaders in the state in this area. Greenbush Middle River then started in 2014, and by 2016 they were the state champions in robotics. think of all those farm kids that have been helping their dad fix tractors since they were in the 2nd grade, and they know how to build stuff up there. Our kids really know how to build stuff too, and program and electrical engineering, but they really know how to build stuff that holds up out there. They'd already won the regional competition up in Grand Forks. They'd already qualified for the Worlds again, and then they were down at Williams Arena. And the first match I watched was this cooperative competition. You don't know till an hour beforehand who your partners are going to be on this team game, and it looked like a material handling warehouse. And there was one team from outside Minnesota, from Orlando, sponsored by NASA. And then there was one team from Czechoslovakia. Just by serendipity, Greenbush Middle River gets paired with the Orlando team, and then another team, I don't know who it was, against 3 other teams. And so the idea is that if you don't know until about an hour or two before before the match who your partners are going to be, you better make sure everybody's robot works, because you don't know who you'll end up with for a partner. So Greenbush, Middle River, Orlando, and somebody else end up as partners. And when it was all said and done in that match, the score was 485 to 90. And I think all the people from Orlando out in the audience were cheering, thinking their team was the one, the NASA team was the one that got all the points. But no, it was Greenbush, Middle River that was just cleaning up. Wow. So it was impressive. And then Edina's machine broke down. I got to talk to the kids. Their machine broke down on the first go-around. They have 9 matches over 2 days, and then they get to pair up with another team. And the other thing I wanted to say was we get this terrific urban-rural relationship going between Edina and Greenbush Middle River. All of our kids went up there last summer, got to do things that farm kids do, ride 4-wheelers, ride horses, and hang out, and they had a great time, and their kids have come down here and stayed with our families as well. So it was another way to deal with this urban-rural issue that I hadn't even thought about. That was really, it was powerful. So we got good kids in our town. Proud of them. Manager Neal.
Thank you, Your Honor. I got a number of quick updates, and then I have 2 that I want to do from the podium, because I've got some graphics to show you. The first one is to tell you that during the budget process, you told me that you wanted us to have more kind of in-the-field supervision of some of our problem residential redevelopment projects. So we budgeted more money to do that. We were able to hire a young man named Vic Conters, who is a retired police officer from our police department. Yeah, Vic's going to be great at that job. He has a long history of being able to tell people to do things they don't want to do, and do it very politely. He's got a good way about him, and we couldn't have picked a better guy. Second,
does he get to keep his gun and use that?
No, no.
Because then they really would do what he asked them to do.
No.
Okay.
Can't arm everybody. The student commissioner interviews, we're getting ready to plan for that process once again. We are looking for, I think we have 2 of you, generally. So if you are interested in that, we haven't picked the times yet. So once we get the council members, then we'll pick the times, and then we'll start the process. And so if you're interested in that, reach out to MJ Lehman, and she'll plug you in. One of the things that's been that's on our work plan for 2018 is to take a look at it, is to develop and bring to the council a process for rental housing licensing and inspections. So we are developing that process right now. We are fortunate in Edina that we have control over our own public health, community health folks. Most other cities in the state don't have that benefit, and so we're going to propose to organize that function out of our public health group. And so that Jeff Brown is working on that proposal right now. When he's got it ready, we'll be bringing it back to the council. There's some ordinance changes that we'll need you to make and authorize both the ordinance itself and the fees that go with licensing. But that's on our work plan, and we're going to bring that to you later. And I think that's all I got for here. I'll go downstairs. one of the things that we are getting closer on is bringing you the final report from the Race and Equity Task Force. This is a nice graphic that staff prepared. MJ Lehman prepared this, and this is based on a discussion that we've been having with our Race and Equity Task Force. And I wanted just to show you kind of the process that we think that we're on as we kind of make the turn and go into the home stretch here. Draft reports and recommendations are going to be shared with you in a work session format on April 17th. It says 5 o'clock there, but I really think we mean 5:30. And that'll be the only subject that's on the work session calendar for the night. They prepped for that April 17th presentation actually just last night. So their recommendations are coming together. They did a lot of wordsmithing on them last night, and they're getting them ready to put into final form, and then they want to share them with you and get your kind of have some Q&A and get your feedback on what they're proposing to you. Once they got that, they'll have one more meeting internally, and then they'll get ready for their final presentation, their final report, which they'll deliver at the council meeting on May 15th. At that point, what we would like the council to do is to kind of receive and refer the report. Receive and refer means that at that point, the staff haven't given any comment to the recommendations you're receiving. We really wanted them to have their day in the sun in front of you, to make their proposals to you the way that they wanted to make them. But then we also would like the council to seek and receive some feedback from city staff on prioritization, on feasibility, on advisability, et cetera. And so we'd like council to ask staff to comment on the recommendations, and we can now start to have a sense of what some of them are going to be. So I think that's not going to take all that long to get that report back to you. But we would have a final meeting with them internally, the task force and the working groups, that is, in mid-June, and we would give them kind of a reaction to their work. And at that point, they would be done, and they're interested in being done. We've had some discussion about what happens to their work after they're gone. They're interested in making sure that the contributions that they've worked hard for and the time that they've spent is well used. So as you see going forward, one of the things that we've built into this process near the end and as an ongoing feature is accountability, and accountability being at the Human Rights and Relations Commission. And whether that is an annual review of the operational plan or the implementation plan, it's probably both, but there would be some staff presentation to the HRRC annually, at least annually, where we talk about what we've completed and what we've got left to go. So that's how we see this kind of playing out. The council is going to be in the position to hear this. You're going to receive feedback from the task force, from city staff, before you're charged with, or before you have the opportunity to make a final decision.
Great, good. Thank you for the update. Any questions for Manager Neal on this issue?
No, looking forward to it.
Good. All right, thank you. And then I think you wanted to talk about 50th and France parking plans still.
I sure do. Might have to come out just a little, well, wait a second. How about that? There. So as the mayor commented earlier tonight, we have been hearing a lot from some of the business owners and property owners in the 50th and France district about the impact of the projects, both the city project at the parking ramp and the Nolan Mains, or what we'll call the private project that is Saturday Properties and Pete Dinovic are doing. So part of that strategy is that we have seen is the parking and the parking reaction study and strategy that we laid out back in the middle of last year. Not all of it's working, and it's not working for a variety of reasons. Some people don't feel comfortable using valet. Some people don't know where the valet is. There's signage issues. There was project staging issues that came into play. But really, there are a number of different factors that we're hearing about and consistently hearing about that we feel like need to be remedied. And we've had some one-on-one discussion actually with Lunds about what we can do with their employee base to take employees out of parking ramps and put them in off-site parking and transport them with small bus circulators to get them to and from off-site back down to the corner for jobs. What you're seeing in front of you tonight is a revised description of the strategy that we'd like to move forward with in certain stages. And it really comes down to two different pieces of strategy. One is better management of the site itself, and one is simply providing more stalls. One of the issues that we are encountering right now, and it'll actually come to bear later this week, is that we will not have as many stalls available in the north ramp that we thought we would in April. Especially at the time when the center ramp is going to be coming down. So the center ramp will be closed, and they're going to start taking the center ramp down, and there aren't as many spots open in the north ramp as we thought there were because the project didn't get going as fast as we thought it would. Their cure times are longer than we thought it would, than we thought it would take. So the cure times on the concrete. So those stalls in that project will open up. They just won't open up as fast as we'd hoped they would. So what you're looking at are some proposals that we would like to seek your support of as we go forward. And these are proposals for a limited time frame. So they would start sometime in April, they would end sometime in September, but the fact is, as soon as we can have more stalls, enough stalls open in the north ramp, we'd end them immediately. And the strategy here is to engage, one is to engage a group called Interstate Parking, a pretty well-known and well-respected parking management firm in downtown Minneapolis, maybe other places as well. They have a full-time manager that they can put on our site to manage the entire parking infrastructure, how the valet works, when stalls are available, when they're not, how to best use the off-site parking to date. Another strategy is to reduce the time in the ramps from 5 hours to 3 hours, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. One of the things we're having some issues with is enforcement of parking permits, particularly employee parking. So if you would go there, if you would go to the north ramp early in the morning, you'd see it filled up, and there aren't customers there at that time. Most of those cars belong to employees who are doing early shifts at some of the businesses. So we are looking forward. We're trying to work with police and probably even some third parties to enforce our existing parking regs more tightly. We're looking here at leasing some off-site parking stalls. Bill has been making those calls, and I think has got some tentative approvals for that. The biggest cost in this proposal, though, is adding a shuttle service, and this is the cost of a shuttle service, a 2-hour AM/PM peak Monday through Friday. To provide sort of a round in the morning and the afternoon to take employees from off-site parking in Utley Park and perhaps even at the lower parking ramp at Perkins and other parking ramps that are off-site, and to bring them down to the corner for jobs. We lay out a proposal here where we'd refund parking permits and we waive parking permits in the upcoming year, again, to try to better manage the number of people that we have there. And also leasing off-site stalls at 54th and France and other locations. Finally, to extend, one of the questions we've had before is that we've talked to council about is the possibility of extending on-street parking from the current 6 hours to 10 hours. That would provide additional stalls for employees that work in the district. We know that's a tough call to make, and that you'll get a lot of feedback on that one. But we've had that request from the businesses and the property owners in the district, and their employees have said they would use those stalls if they were more available to them. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Manager Neal? Member Staunton?
Not so much a question as just comment. I applaud the efforts. I think you and the staff are doing a terrific job of really just trying to lean into this. This is going to be a painful transition for everybody. We all know that. We're trying our best to make it as tolerable as it can be for the merchants as well as for the residents. And I'm all for taking reasonable steps. These strike me as reasonable steps to try to alleviate that. I mean, this is just part of what you've been doing. Right. You've been updating us on a number of things. The only caveat or the only piece of advice I'd suggest you think about a little bit is at some point we should stop and let it settle in, because continuing to change may defeat the purpose, even though I understand that there's going to constantly be good faith requests for more help because, it's a real inconvenience. But it may be that eventually we're at a place where it will get better only by settling in and getting into a routine that people can understand and expect.
I appreciate that, and we've heard that exact comment from property owners in the district as well. That one of the problems they have, they tell us they have, is that we're changing. If somebody says they think the valet service would work better down the street a little bit, we move it down the street and we find that out, and then that doesn't work, and we're moving it all around. We're being too responsive in some ways. So, I think you're right. Setting a status quo in here for a little while is probably going to be a desirable thing. I think the thing that we're most concerned about is the end of the week, where right now we've got a lot of parking on a relative basis down there now because both the north ramp and the center ramp are available, but the center ramp is leaving, and so that's going to be a new stressor.
And I think it's worth the investment. This is a long haul improvement. It's going to be better on the other side, and we need to be good partners in trying to help get through the transition.
No, thank you, Member Staunton. Member Stewart.
Three quick things. One, to dovetail off of Member Staunton's comment, I think if we open up on-street parking to 10 hours, I fear that some of those employees will think they can park on the street and then they won't do the shuttle, and they won't give themselves enough time to do the shuttle. So I think I would rather force the issue and get them to use the shuttle. I think it's better to not give them the other option. Okay. Second, for the upcoming Edina Art Fair, we need to have some special thought and planning go into that, and especially for how the employees will get to their workplaces during that weekend, because that's going to be rough. And third, I think it's important not to extend the time period for the construction. We don't want to miss a second Christmas holiday season. And I think I really like the schedule as it's been put together, so I would resist anything that would create a longer duration for the projects, because I agree with Member Staunton that it's, in the long term, it's going to be a benefit for everybody, but there's some pain to go through.
And there was a long discussion about that. Should we stretch this out and minimize pain in the short run, or should we just get it done and endure more pain in the short run? And it was the latter, and so that we're in the middle of that, suffering that pain right now.
All right. Well, having been down there and visited with some of the merchants, and to Member Staunton's point, I think we finally landed on a plan that you've articulated here that is going to work, and we just need to stick to it now and stick with it. And this is what we're going to do, and to make this thing a success. Other mayors I talked to are astounded at what we're doing to try to keep 50th and France viable during this construction period. And I know some of our merchants down there are very pleased. I think Bespoke has spoken up at meetings and said they think they're doing a great job, and their customers are happy. Their customers are happy using valet. And that's not a common theme down there, but I do notice now that some of the employers down there are much more cooperative, and I think it'll be a big difference in the outcome here, but once we all get pulling in the same direction. So, which is something Member Staunton mentioned as well.
So what we'll do from here is the items on this list that don't need council approval, we're going to move forward with. The items that do need your approval, we're going to start moving in front of you kind of very quickly and try to implement as many of these pieces of the strategy as we can.
Okay. All right, thank you. Is that it for you for updates?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Anything else from anyone? All right, good. We stand adjourned.
I have this for you. This is from 159.
Okay.